Our story begins on King Luin Peak, a place covered in voluminous clouds and interconnected buildings, where a man wields an axe, sits down and sighs, telling himself that he too has chopped a lot of wood today, until he looks over and sees on the system panel that the total number of wood chopped by the host is 3,650,000, and then he wonders if he's ever chopped that much wood, and the system panel congratulates the host on acquiring the title of wood chopping saint, and he thinks that it's just as you imagined. He's from the land. He became quite a popular young man because of a talent show. However, because he disobeyed the agency's orders, they put him on the back burner, and he ended up succumbing and developing depression. And after that, he was reborn at the King Hong Academy to the south of Yunhuang, becoming a teacher in the academy's runic seals department. The boy believed that after he was reborn and received the system, he would be able to demonstrate his strength and live a different life, and he would never imagine that the system he received was a woodcutting system, something completely useless in his view, unless he was talking about chopping wood. And then, while he was doing what he already knew best, which was chopping firewood, he picked up one of the cut pieces and said to himself, while looking at that piece of firewood, that even though he had become the holy firewood chopper, he still hadn't managed to get past the stage of luminosity. And suddenly, while the boy was reflecting and talking to himself, a long-haired, white-robed boy called out to Grandmaster Bai, who was flying through the sky and ended up crashing into the piles of firewood. And then he tells Bai that the leader had asked him to inform him that the examination at the front of the palace on the mountain has already begun, and asks Bai to please go to the front garden and select a disciple. And at the same time, he thinks that even if he goes there with this level of cultivation, he finds it completely unlikely that he will get a disciple. And then Bai says that it is understood and he could already go, and the boy says goodbye to him, and again, after leaving, he ends up making the wood fall. And then, the poor guy stares at the pile he's put together, and with sweat on his face, he thinks that considering his kingdom, it's likely he won't get a disciple, and he hasn't had a barbecue in a while. So he goes to take a look at the dragon in the kangaroo abyss and see if it's gotten chubby. Then we see the inscription plaza, and then there was an outsider swordsman called Zhang Himing, and then a boy on the left said that once again, there were many interested in the sword arts department, and Zhang said that he was flattered, and then the boy on the left said that he had managed to get 500 disciples so easily. This was something that could really arouse envy. But the boy on the left also said that on the other hand, no one was interested in the runic seals exam. The instructor Bai Luochen didn't even show up, and the boy says that, however, a piece of trash like that has occupied King Luin Peak, which has the best scenery in the whole academy. They find it quite annoying, and at this, the other boy comments that he is a teacher who is still at the stage of rotating light, and for him to go there would be a disgrace, until Zhang gets quite angry and shouts, saying that Grandmaster Bai is overstepping his bounds. He also comments that Bai hasn't had a single disciple for 10 consecutive years, which is why he doesn't show up. And then he starts walking and approaches the leader, who is sitting on his throne, and says that he begs the leader to take Bai's teaching position away and to make him leave King Luin Peak so that he can rectify the academy's style. And the leader, an old man with a long beard, tells them not to forget, saying that young brother Bai lost all his cultivation and spent 10 years in the revolving light stage for protecting the academy, and that old man is the leader of King Hong Academy. His name is Lai Guangqi. And after he had said this, everyone was silent for a brief minute, and then Zhang, with his hands together, told old man Lai Guangqi that they would not forget Grandmaster Bai's contributions to the academy, but in his current state, he was not qualified to continue as a teacher. At this, one of the boys present asked what they thought about taking away his teaching position, but allowing him to continue living on King Luin Peak. At this, the old man didn't give an answer, and at this, the boy next to him listening, with a white bandana on his head, replied that young brother Yan was absolutely right. Bai simply appears, surprising everyone, saying that he thanks them all for their consideration and says that he is deeply touched. He says this with a smile on his face, being quite ironic, and in a rather strange way, he was holding a blue snake in his hand. At this, Zhang approaches him and comments that Grandmaster Bai may be in a good mood, but he asks if it isn't humiliating to be injured in such a way by a lousy snake, and at this, Bai replies to Zhang, saying that that beast had some cultivation and he was almost killed, and at this, a girl in the crowd is watching everything, while Zhang comments to Bai that although he has a low cultivation, he is still in a good mood. And about the snake, it seems quite normal even, and he doesn't think it has any kind of cultivation, and at that moment, that That girl seems to be quite apprehensive. She sees a different energy in Bai, a red-colored energy. She thinks that's something different, and at that, Zhang continues, saying that the Grandmaster needs immediate treatment, and he happens to have a pill of the 5 elements of Yuan cultivation with him, and so he takes the pill and asks Bai to please take it, leaving Bai surprised at that moment. And then he gives a condition, pointing to a row of people. He says that if he gets at least 1 disciple today, he'll gladly give that pill to Bai, and with a smile on his face, Zhang points to Bai, saying that if he doesn't get even 1 disciple, he'll have to resign, and then Bai points his finger at him and replies that he's too lazy to play games with Zhang. He won't get even 1 disciple this year, and then he leaves. And then Zhang, with an expression of displeasure and dissatisfaction, exclaimed loudly, making it clear that he didn't accept the situation and wasn't willing to accept the decision. He quickly made his way to the leader, running with hurried steps, keeping his hands joined in a sign of respect, a traditional gesture that indicated his humility, but at the same time his determination. When he finally approached the leader, his voice rose strongly and firmly, showing all his indignation. He accused Instructor Bai of being lazy and sloppy in his responsibilities, saying that his kingdom was low and that a person of this stature was not worthy of being a teacher, especially in such a prestigious academy, then pointed directly at Bai, making a formal and forceful request to the leader, asking for him to be dismissed from his position. The tension in the room increased, and some young people who were close to the leader began to comment among themselves. One of them said that young Bai no longer had the ability to teach with the same competence as before, and another agreed, saying that Zhang was absolutely right in his assessment. The leader, hearing the comments and the direct accusation, decided to question Bai about the situation, asked him in a calm way what he had to say for himself. Bai, without showing any great signs of regret or concern, answered in a relaxed way, trying to minimize the seriousness of the situation. He said that he didn't see such a problem with the accusation because, for him, the reduction in his responsibilities meant less work, something that, in his view, was a benefit. Bai also clearly expressed that he didn't care what happened, as long as he was allowed to remain on Qingluan Peak, the place where he resided. A young man who was observing the scene thought in his heart that if Bai lost his position, he would be in an ideal position to take his place on Qingluan Peak, which was a very tempting opportunity. Another boy, however, couldn't understand how someone at the stage of rotating light, like Bai, could have the privilege of remaining in such a sacred and respected place, a true jewel of the academy. It was then that the leader, after hearing Bai's words, made his decision. With a firm and resolute tone, he announced his verdict. The leader declared that Bai Luochen, the instructor of the academy's runic seals department, had failed in his responsibility as an educator, since he hadn't accepted any disciples in the last 10 years due to his limited strength, which made him unable to fulfill his role properly. The leader then informed them that due to this background and Bai's lack of qualifications to be an effective teacher, he would no longer be able to continue holding the position of instructor. The decision was made, and Bai would lose his position immediately. However, before any further steps were taken, suddenly a loud and determined voice interrupted the trial. It was a young woman who approached and, with confidence, asked everyone to wait a moment. She introduced herself and, with a twinkle in her eye, stated that she was willing to study under Bai Luochen and learn the arts of the runic seals, thus defying the negative opinions circulating about him. Immediately, a buzz took over the room. Many began to murmur about the young woman's decision, commenting critically that Bai was at the stage of the rotating light, and that, in their view, he was so weak that he could barely support himself, compared to a chicken. Most of the people around Bai considered it a waste of time, a complete waste of resources. Among the comments, some still questioned what had happened to the young woman, asking skeptically if she had gone mad. Willing herself to be guided by someone so inferior, all eyes turned to the young woman, a beautiful girl who, in the midst of the confusion, maintained a calm and serene expression. One of the boys present, not believing what he was hearing, asked aloud if she was really paying attention to the words that had been said just before, trying to understand how someone so intelligent could make such a controversial choice. The criticism continued, and the comments about Bai were relentless, many telling the girl that she was making a colossal mistake, as Bai Luochen was not qualified to be anyone's mentor, being a nullity himself. They claimed that if she followed their decision and was trained by Bai, she would become nothing more than a simple servant, with no prospect of growth or success. However, Zhang, seeing that the girl seemed to be talented and had promising spiritual roots, tried to convince her to change her mind, suggesting that if she chose chose to follow another path. He could offer her a prominent position in the sword arts department. Deep down, what Zhang really wanted was to harm Bai in some way, looking for an opportunity to take advantage of the situation and cause as much damage as possible to his rival, regardless of what happened to the young woman. And at this, the pretty young girl simply hugs Bai's arm, saying that she had already made up her mind and asks Bai to please agree to be her instructor, and Bai looks at her and comments that she's a bit hasty and says that he really doesn't feel like going through with it. And at that, Zhang is completely bored at that moment, thinking and wondering how anyone would give up the sword arts department to learn runic seals from Bai, who he refers to as garbage in his mind. And he believes there's something going on, and the girl asks Bai to accept being her instructor, and the boy comments that he's just refused, and Zhang thinks that woman must be someone Bai Luotian plans to put next to him. They're acting in a way to get a prominent position in the sword arts department, and when the time comes, the sword arts department will become Bai Luotian's private playground, and he'll do as he pleases. And then he points his finger at Bai and says that it's a good plan, and says that it's a shame because he's not an idiot, leaving Bai and the girl next to him, not understanding anything he's saying. And then he puts his hands together, telling the leader that it's like they say, a melon plucked from its vine loses its sweet taste. And then he asks the leader to allow the girl to be Bai's disciple. And Bai doesn't understand anything after hearing Zhang say this, and the girl continues to hug his arm. And then the woodcutter asks the girl why she wants him to become her teacher so much, and he says that as she can see, he's nothing more than a piece of garbage in the rotating light stage. And at that, she tries to find an answer for him, and she thinks it's that she's an immortal who's been reincarnated. She had to be reincarnated with her memories because her cultivation hadn't been successful, and she wanted to choose the sword arts department. With her talent and appearance, it wouldn't be a problem to steal more than 80% of the department's cultivation resources. However, she thinks she didn't expect that at the last minute she would find a genuine master. She thinks that she makes no mistakes thanks to the vision of an immortal that she has, and obviously that snake is about to become a dragon. If they were to judge according to human cultivation, she is a supreme master of the Mahayana stage, and even if she was an immortal in her previous life, she wouldn't dare say that she would be able to subdue a snake that is about to become a dragon. She was thinking, and at the same time wondering how it was that he was at the rotating light stage and had conquered a dragon. And then the old man grabbed one of the strands of his beard, and then he stood up, saying that since instructor Zhang wasn't against it, he would make the announcement. And then Bai called out to him, asking the leader to wait a bit as he had something to say. But the leader continued, saying that the disciple would be officially transferred to the sword arts department for the runic seals department. At this, the leader smiles and asks Bai if the older brother there isn't a big deal, and Bai says that he isn't a big deal. And then the leader says that the recruitment conference is over, and everyone starts to gather at that point, and Zhang looks at Bai, smiling a lot, and congratulates him on getting a great disciple, and says that in 3 months, the runic seals department will do very well in the academy exam. And then the protagonist wonders if Zhang has hit his head because he's acting strangely, and then he says that, by the way, he doesn't know his student's name. And then he asks the pretty girl what her name is, and the girl answers her instructor, saying that her name is Su Liu. And at the same time, Bai thinks that he wouldn't even have gone there if he'd known that this was going to happen, and he ended up making trouble for himself by being silly, and just thinking about it was making him tired. And so he comments to the girl that Su Liu is a nice name, and Liu thanks her master for the compliment. And at the same time, the young protagonist thinks that he should let it go. He's already accepted it anyway, and it's like they say, the master will only show the way. Cultivation will depend on the disciple. Whatever happens, everything will depend on her. Then, at Qingluan Peak, Liu was analyzing the place. She stood for a moment, looking at that pile of firewood, and she thinks that Bai Luotian is really someone powerful, and wonders at the same time why he suffers oppression from his colleagues like that. And she is also impressed by the amount of firewood there is. And then the protagonist opens the door, and at that moment, she keeps thinking, with his realm, he would easily wipe out the King Hong Academy, and she also wonders why he keeps accepting this. And then, Bai turns around and says that she would like to make a few things clear about his teaching method. And then, he says that the first one, he doesn't plan lessons. He who is from the runic seals department are self-aware. Secondly, they can come and go as they please, and there's no need to report to him when she's leaving or what she's doing. And thirdly, as she may have seen, the resources for cultivation there are a bit scarce, since he has no students. students, but she shouldn't worry. As her teacher, he'll try to help, and then she'll have the necessary resources, and as for the fourth, he doesn't know yet. And, after a brief pause, he turns to Liu, looking directly into her eyes, and asks in a serene but firm voice if she has any doubts or questions that she wishes to ask at that moment. The girl, maintaining a respectful and humble posture before the master, answers directly, saying that she has no doubts. This simple dialogue seems to satisfy the young protagonist, who expresses his approval with a discreet smile, stating that this is excellent. He takes the opportunity to mention that her esteemed master, in his wisdom and dedication, had anticipated and prepared 2 books, especially to help her in her learning. With an agile and confident gesture, he takes the 2 volumes, robust and carefully bound, and throws them towards Liu, asking her to take them carefully. The girl, with quick reflexes, holds the books firmly, feeling the physical and symbolic weight of the knowledge they carried. Then the young man begins to explain the contents of the books in detail. He states that the first volume can be considered a comprehensive textbook, carefully crafted by himself. This book is a valuable source of learning, covering in a systematic and meticulous way all aspects related to runic seals. He emphasizes that the content is organized into problems that are solved step by step, allowing the reader to understand each step of the process. After describing the first book, he goes on to talk about the second volume, which he says is a collection of practical exercises designed to reinforce and consolidate the knowledge acquired in the first book. The exercises, like the problems in the first volume, are also organized by level of difficulty, with the most relevant difficulties highlighted to make studying easier. He advises Liu to be patient and disciplined in her studies, asking her not to be so greedy that she wants to absorb all the content at once. According to him, learning should be seen as a gradual process, in which each stage is important. He also assures her that he will monitor her progress periodically, making sure that she is on the right track, and encourages her to work hard and dedicate herself as much as possible. Showing respect and commitment, Liu bows before the master, promising sincerely that, as a disciple, she will never forget the teachings he has shared with her. After hearing the girl's promise, Master Bai, with a quiet gesture, points to a nearby area and informs her that the disciples' rooms are located in that direction. He explains that all the rooms are unoccupied and that she is free to choose the one she likes best, and he assures her that if she needs anything that isn't available at the moment, she can go to the disciples in charge of the Internal Affairs Department, who will take care of providing everything she needs. As she walks towards the rooms, Liu can't help but feel deeply impressed and, at the same time, somewhat intimidated by the grandeur and complexity of the building around her. She observes every detail of her surroundings, from the ornate columns to the vast, imposing corridors, and feels a twinge of nervousness. For a brief moment, she wonders if it might be too late to reconsider her decision to change departments. But after some reflection, she decides that she should accept the circumstances and face the challenges with courage and determination. In her mind, she concluded that if it was difficult, she would just let it happen and do her best to adapt and overcome it. Meanwhile, Master Bai, demonstrating a skill that seemed almost supernatural, sat down on the ground with a serene expression and began to peel the skin off a snake with his bare hands, without using any tools. The movements of his hands were so precise and fast that it seemed as if he were using an extremely sharp blade. With dexterity, he cuts the snake's meat into perfectly proportioned pieces, and carefully places them on skewers that he had prepared beforehand. His aim, as is evident, was to prepare a snake barbecue. To do this, he uses his own magic, summoning a small flame with the tip of his finger with a controlled movement. He throws the flame directly onto the charcoal laid out under the grill. The charcoal quickly begins to burn, releasing an even heat that would be perfect for roasting the meat skewers. The whole scene is both fascinating and intriguing, showing Master Bai's mastery and unusual skills. Meanwhile, Liu goes on her way, determined to face what is to come, carrying with her the books that symbolized the beginning of her new journey. The girl was trying to tidy up the room, which was very difficult. The conditions were completely precarious, until the smell of snake meat came to her. She felt it and thought that it smelled very very good, so she quickly went outside to see what was going on and saw Bai grilling the meat. So she thought and wondered if he was grilling the dragon, and at that, she's completely stunned at that moment. Wide-eyed, she thinks that dragons are still immortal beasts, and the individual has to offer them to the patriarch if he gets one, and at that, she sees Bai eating the meat off the spit, and she thinks too, and at the same time wonders if he grills it and then eats it, and at that, she keeps visualizing him eating quietly and witnessing that, her cheeks start to blush, and she thinks that, speaking of which, she's been cultivating for thousands of years, and she's never tasted the meat of a dragon. She was a little apprehensive at that moment, and then, she calls out to the master who was eating the dragon meat just fine, and she says that she was getting hungry, with a smile on her face and her cheeks flushed. She asks if she can have some meat, and Bai simply replies to her in a very direct way that no. She's practically petrified by the answer he's just given her, and she thinks that she never imagined that a piece of meat would be denied to a worthy immortal like her, and she's crestfallen and her cheeks are flushed. Also thinking that if the Taoists from her previous life knew about this, they'd die laughing at her, and then, while she's looking at him with a crying face, Bai tells her not to stare at him like that. And after that, she turns her back, saying that he doesn't need to give it to her, and calls him a stingy master, until Bai asks her to wait a moment, and she stops walking and turns to him, asking if she can eat now, her mouth watering, and Bai, being very stingy, picks up a piece of meat and tells her to take it, and tells her that she could lick it. Seeing his stinginess, she gets completely annoyed and picks up the piece of meat, her hands shaking with annoyance at that moment. At this, Bai comments that disciples shouldn't call their masters petty, and also says that after she licks the stick, she'll understand why her master acted in such a way, and at this, the girl's cheeks flush, thinking about the way he says things, and then, she thinks it's okay, and she'll just give it a little lick, and at this, after she licks it, she goes wide-eyed. She feels something completely different. She tells herself that the spiritual energy is so abundant, and she starts to get teary-eyed, saying that she can't stand it, and she thinks that she had no idea that a tiny piece of this was equivalent to something like half a year of cultivation, and she also thinks that at her current level, she can't contain the oppressive energy contained in the dragon's meat, and if she had eaten it, she would have exploded and died, and then she bows to Bai and tells him that she is very grateful for her master's generosity, and then Bai tells his student that one lick a day is enough, and she shouldn't be ambitious, and Liu replies that his disciple will remember well what he said, and then the scene changes. There were two people with an open portal, and the horse that instructor Bai breeds has great spirituality. The last time some clansmen tried to steal that horse, they got beaten up by Bai, and then we see two boys jumping over the wall, and then one of the boys asks the other if it's going to work with just the two of them, and then the boy answers him, saying that he doesn't need to worry because he's already taken precautions. He had an item in his hands and says that this is the 100 days of drunkenness that Big Brother has been researching recently. A light sprinkle of it on monsters of grid 5 or below, and it will make them pass out on the spot. And then, the boy would ask. But then, the boy tells him to be quiet because there was someone there. And then the protagonist put grass in the horse's bowl so that it could eat, and while it was eating, the protagonist said to the horse that he remembers when he caught it. It was very thin and small, like a little donkey, and now that horse looks majestic. And he asks the horse to take care of the place because he is going to sleep, and then he starts walking to go to his bed. And then the two invaders stand in the corner waiting for him to leave the place so they can take the horse, and after Bai opens the door, the boy tells the other that Bai has already gone, and then this was the time they could act. They say that the horse will go back to the beast training department. And then, minutes before, Liu was sitting on her bed, reading the book, until after leafing through that book for a while, she decides it was time to close it. She senses something, and then she thinks, and at the same time wonders who has the audacity to commit the outrage of entering King Luin Peak, and then she gets up and puts the book on the table, and then she thinks that she would teach whoever it is a lesson, and at that moment, the boys approach the stable where the horse is. The man laughs, already thinking that he would manage to steal Bai's horse, and then the two boys approach and start pouring the item, and one of the boys with a smile on his face tells the horse that he's a good boy and says that everything will be fine. Then, suddenly, Liu appears, with a gigantic energy exuding from her. She asks the two who they are and orders them to say their names immediately, and then the boy on the left asks who that is to his older brother, and the guy on the right replies that she must be the weirdo who left a high position in the sword arts department and went to learn from Bai Luotian's trash. So he tells Liu that this has nothing to do with her and asks her to go to her room and go back to sleep. At which point Liu, with a very strong stance, says that while she's there, they won't touch anything that belongs to her master. At this, the boy starts to run towards Liu, telling her that they're going to take the hard way, and being very quick, he tells her that it was entirely her choice and that she shouldn't blame him. At this, the girl stares at him and then she turns away and simply kicks the man full in the face, sending him crashing to the ground and making the boy who was with him worry. He quickly went to lift up his companion, and at that, the boy who had been kicked with all his might spits out some blood and says that the girl has a few tricks up her sleeve, and the boy next to him is happy that he seems to be all right. And at that, the man says that he will try again, and if it goes badly, his companion should help him, and the boy says that he will succeed, calling him his big brother. At this, the young man's body starts to catch fire, and he lunges at Liu, who doesn't let it go either and starts running towards him. Just as the young man prepares to strike her, the girl simply kicks him again with her leg on fire. This time she kicks him in the arm, causing him to fall to the ground rolling, and he starts screaming in pain, saying that his arm is hurting a lot, and he says that the damn fire is eating away at his spiritual energy, and the boy gets worried seeing his older brother being hit twice without even being able to do anything. So he says that he'll help him, and Bai hears the whole situation going on outside. So he gets up and puts on his slippers, looks at the window, and is absurdly displeased. He lets out a long sigh, clearly demonstrating that the situation was far from being something he wanted to face. The weight of the moment is reflected in his serious expression, and he hesitates for a moment, almost as if looking for an alternative solution. However, with a quick and precise snap of his fingers, he activates a technique that immediately creates an invisible barrier around his pupil. This barrier appears as an almost instantaneous magical protection, completely enveloping her in a kind of shield that separates her from the outside environment. At the same moment, the boy who was preparing to attack her, in a hasty move and without calculating the consequences, ends up colliding with force against the magical barrier. The impact is so sudden and intense that the boy is thrown backwards, falling awkwardly to the ground. The girl, inside the protective field, observes the scene with curiosity and surprise. She begins to wonder if that magical barrier was, in fact, an advanced runic seal capable of generating a soundproof field, cutting off any kind of external interference. Meanwhile, the other boys, who apparently intended to steal the horse that was on the ground nearby, are completely stunned by what they have just witnessed. Shock and disbelief show on their faces, and the momentary silence is broken only by the disciple herself, who comments almost casually that it seems her master also intended to teach them a valuable lesson. The thieves, unable to hide their nervousness, become visibly upset. One of them, completely desperate, almost bursts into tears, trying to justify the situation. He stammered out disconnected words, as if hoping that this would be enough to avoid further consequences. Soon afterwards, another young man, overcome by frustration and indignation, slams his hand down on the nearby table, making a loud noise that echoes around the room. This young man, whose irritation shines through, is identified as He Sheng, the oldest and most respected veteran of the Beast Training Department. His firm posture and the natural authority that emanates from him make it clear that he doesn't intend to tolerate any more confusion. Meanwhile, the two boys who had been taken by surprise by the magical barrier awkwardly try to explain what happened. The younger of them, clearly panicked, stutters as he tells the veteran that they had tried their best, but Master Bai's new disciple was incredibly powerful. They simply hadn't been able to stand up to her, and the result had been a total failure. The other, older and injured, tried to calm spirits by assuring Zhang Sheng that he needn't worry. He promised that as soon as they managed to treat the injuries they had suffered, they would set about bringing back Wu Jui, the horse that belonged to Master Bai and had become the center of all the confusion. The veteran, without showing any obvious emotion, takes 2 healing potions from his bag and throws them to the two boys, his voice firm and authoritative as he instructs the two on how they should proceed. He explains that they should each use 3 spirit restoration pills and 2 spirit nourishment pills, considering this to be compensation for the injuries they had suffered. The older man, his face visibly bruised and scarred from the fight, thanked the veteran for his help, bowing respectfully despite his obvious pain. Zhang Sheng, however, wasted no time with formalities or niceties. He was direct and incisive, ordering the two of them to take care of their injuries straight away, because he himself was going to solve the problem once and for all. Then, without hesitation, he raises his voice in a loud loud, clear shout, summoning all the members of the Beast Training Department to follow him immediately to Kingluan Peak. The determination in his words and the strength of his leadership causing everyone to move quickly, without questioning his orders. As the group begins to organize itself to leave, Zhang Sheng makes a promise: he will seek justice. His intention is clear, and his determination leaves no room for doubt. However, one of the men in the group tries to stop him. Appealing to reason, he asks the veteran to wait, arguing that Master Bai is still a respected instructor, and that, in that particular situation, the blame lay with him. The man insists that, if they simply went straight there, they would end up generating more problems than solutions. The tension in the air is understandable, and the outcome of the situation promises to be a challenge for both the disciples and Master Bai himself. And at that, Zhang Sheng asks him if they were going to let it go then, as that horse was from their department, and asks who it was that gave him the right to take the horse, and the man says that Zhang Sheng got it wrong. And at that, the man continues, saying that his disciple seriously violated the rules of the academy when she beat them up, and he goes on to say that they just need to use Zhang Sheng's high moral level. Bai will be speechless when he sees what she did to the two novices. And then, they ask for Wu Jui. He has to take care of his disciples. There's no way he can refuse, and at that, Zhang Sheng, listening to that man, says that it seems to be a good plan, and they will do it this way. And then, Zhang Sheng shouts to everyone that they should go to the enforcement room. And after that, the night goes away and the morning arrives. Bai comes out of his room and starts stretching, until he hears the sleepy-voiced girl calling for her master. She says good morning to him, and he quickly starts chopping wood with his axe, and he comments that she's already awake, and he asks her how the book went last night, and she's a bit apprehensive and comments that even though she spent the whole night, half a page was enough to use up all the spiritual energy she had. She felt completely dizzy reading that book. It seems that things weren't that easy. She was reading the book and thinking that she couldn't get past half of that page, and then Bai tells her that it's up to her and he's not going to interfere, and the girl says that she understood the master, and she says that I tell the master that she, and then, at the same time, she thinks that obviously the cultivation book that the master had given her is excellent. The problem is that she can't understand him, and so she tells Bai that at that moment she was chopping wood with the axe, that she only read half a page, and after Bai has heard this, he asks her what she said, and then he asks her if she read half a page in one night, and she is completely crestfallen by this, and then, with a completely shaky voice, she replies to the master, saying that she is sorry for having disappointed her master, and with a smile on his face, Bai replies that on the contrary, this was a pleasant surprise for him. He thought she would only be able to read a few lines, leaving her completely amazed at that moment, and at that, she says with a little sadness that for him to have said that, she asks if then, he thinks she is stupid, and at that, Bai invokes something in his hand and replies to her that no, as he had said before, it was a pleasant surprise for him. He also thinks that that book contains his collection of seals and runes, and he really didn't expect her to be able to read half a page in a single night. So he throws a token to the girl, asking her to take it, and also tells her that although her knowledge of runes and seals is important, she doesn't need to rush. Everything will settle down in time, and he tells her that she will have access to the Academy's library with that token, and there she will find other martial scrolls to read, and she will also find better scrolls as the level of the token increases. And after he has said this, she asks him what she needs to do to increase the level of the token, and Bai, with a smile on his face, tells her that there are two ways: by completing the tasks given irregularly at the front of the academy, or by taking part in the disciples test. And Liu thanks her master for his advice, and she thinks that, comparing the token with her master's book, she's been an immortal for at least 10,000 years, and so there's no shortage of martial manuscripts for her, and she also thinks that she's going to study her master's secret manuscript for her whole life, and she wonders what she's going to learn other things for. And then Bai starts to look at the horizon, and she doesn't understand, so she asks the master what happened, and then they hear a voice telling the disciple from Kingluan Peak called Su Liu that she should go there to receive her punishment. The girl tells the master that this must have something to do with the bullies who invaded Kingluan Peak last night. She tries to explain herself a little apprehensively. She says that she didn't hold back, but she's afraid that this will end up causing trouble. And then Bai, with a smile on his face, tells her not to worry and to let him sort it out, and she should just concentrate on her studies. And then he asks her to go there with him so they can see what they want, and she says she understands and it's fine. And then there's a huge group of people watching talking and some people were flying, and then they all stand in front of the portal. And then, a man says that the enforcement hall had been notified. Su Liu, a disciple of the runic seal department, had ignored the rules of the academy and maliciously hurt fellow disciples, and that man was part of the enforcement hall, and his name is Song Lang, and his realm was in the integration stage. And then, he says that it's the rules of the academy and asks Su Liu to please turn herself in. And Bai, seeing everyone there, being very ironic, says that there is a beautiful spectacle going on there, and Bai is completely apprehensive, while he is in a good mood, facing that situation. And then, the master and the disciple begin to walk in front of those people, and in that, a man says that there is clear evidence and asks please that she come with them, calling her Miss Su. That man is called Zhao Cheng, and his kingdom is in the stage of integration, and he was part of the law enforcement hall. And then Bai, without showing any haste or hesitation, raised the axe he was holding firmly, slamming it hard against the floor, the sound echoing through the room, resounding like a thunderclap that seemed to demand immediate attention from everyone present. He raised his voice, laden with authority and confidence, questioning with a sarcastic tone why he was in such a hurry, as if challenging the impatience of the group in front of him. His eyes fixed on the man leading the discussion, he continued, drawing everyone's attention to the crucial point. He spoke in a direct and incisive manner, stating that what really mattered was behind all this, pointing to the heart of the matter that had so far been ignored or underestimated. Bai, with a cutting look, mentioned the two disciples from the beast training department who, according to him, had invaded King Luin Peak in the middle of the night, clearly looking to cause trouble. His unwavering stance increased the tension in the room. While the surprised listeners tried to assimilate the master's words, the group of men, feeling cornered by the accusation, tried to react, asking what exactly Bai and his disciple had done with the two invaders. The question, loaded with concern and a hint of apprehension, seemed to suggest that they were expecting the worst. The situation makes the young man who was leading the group, still trying to keep his composure, show a slight nervousness. The young man, finally taking courage, tries to justify the situation. He explains that the two disciples had entered King Luin Peak by accident and, as a consequence of their recklessness, had already received a severe punishment. Bai, however, does not let the explanation pass without question. He turns his attention to the young man with a serious tone and an analytical expression, asking what exactly he meant by an accident. Without waiting for an immediate answer, Bai turns to his disciple, Su Liu, and comments with a calculated tone that, if that were the case, he could also claim that any injury the invaders suffered at her hands was, in the same way, an accident. He concludes by saying that he would take care of the situation himself, and that there was no need for the Hall of Enforcement to interfere in the case. With this statement, Bai begins to walk calmly alongside his disciple towards the portal, as if he were ready to put the matter behind him, his attitude conveying a disconcerting, almost provocative calm that contrasts with the growing tension in the air. However, the man leading the group indignantly shouts for them to stop immediately, his voice laden with authority and restrained anger, as he states that the law enforcement hall has already judged Su Liu guilty. He warns that if Bai continues to insist on defying the ruling, things could end very badly for him and his disciple. Faced with this, Bai stops walking and, with a completely different expression, lets loose an intense energy that transforms the atmosphere around him, his gaze becoming even more penetrating as he turns to the young man and, with a dark tone full of sarcasm, asks if the boy was really trying to tell him how to proceed. The question, which sounds more like a challenge than a question, makes the young leader swallow dry, clearly shaken by Bai's overwhelming presence. Even so, he tries to maintain his posture and, with a cry that almost fails to convey confidence, appeals to his older brothers. He asks them to remember what they have seen with their own eyes and accuses Bai Luochen of trying to cover up a criminal, something that, according to him, would only make the situation even worse. The young man, showing a mixture of desperation and determination, insists that Su Liu be taken into custody immediately, begging for the intervention of his companions. Bai, for his part, remains silent next to his disciple, observing the scene with a calculated and unwavering gaze, his posture conveying an unbreakable confidence, as if he were one step ahead of everyone. Suddenly, two men who belong to the law enforcement hall descend to the ground, making the atmosphere even more tense. One of them, identified as Song Lang, addresses his words directly to Bai. He says, in a voice full of menace, that all those who have dared to defy the Hall of Law Enforcement in the past have not had happy endings. He goes on to suggest that Bai knew very well what he was was talking about and asks him directly if he was sure he wanted to go down that road. Bai, however, replies in a cutting and dismissive manner, stating that those men were nothing more than brats. He looks at them with contempt and, with a tone that oozes confidence and superiority, asks them if they really believed that they represented the Hall of Law Enforcement. His firm posture and sharp words make it clear that he was not intimidated, and the tension in the air reaches its peak as the two sides prepare for what seemed to be an inevitable confrontation. And at that moment Zhao Cheng becomes furious, shouting and asking Bai how he dares to denigrate the Hall of Law Enforcement, and also says that he will take them to the hall so that they can both be punished. And then he starts running towards Liu and Bai and asks Song to go with them, at which point Zhang Sheng, with a smile on his face, thinks and at the same time wonders if Bai still believes that he is the genius instructor who appeared 10 years ago. And as the two men who were part of the law enforcement hall approached, Zhang Sheng was still thinking and at the same time wondering that the trash who is still at the stage of rotating light, referring to the protagonist, has the audacity to face the law enforcement hall, and he believes that Bai really doesn't care whether he lives or dies. And at this, Bai tells his disciple that this will serve as a test for them to check what she had learned last night, and so she shouldn't disappoint him, and the girl says that she understands. And then she takes a step forward, while Zhao tells her to die, and then she wonders if that's it, dodging Zhao's attack, and then Song prepares to attack her, but she easily manages to dodge his attack too. The two of them had literally attacked the ground, and then she thinks she understands, and that's why her master wanted to test her. She thinks the two of them are so weak that they're not worth her master's time, and so she continues to dodge the attack of the two men who are part of the law enforcement hall, and while she dodges, she continues to reflect, thinking that it seems that as long as she stays close to her master, it won't be long before she reaches her own ascension. And at that, she gets a smile on her face just thinking about it, even at a time when she could be attacked. And at that, Song thinks and at the same time wonders what Su Liu is doing, and also he wonders if she is drawing runes, and at that, he watches her and thinks that even a master of runic seals needs to draw the seals beforehand, and he wonders if she is drawing them in the middle of the battle. And at that, Zhao thinks and at the same time wonders if Su Liu is underestimating them, and then Song asks Zhao to let them use it, and then, at that moment, the girl continues to dodge all the attacks they direct at her, and then Song tells Zhao that they'll finish her off together, and the girl, a little annoyed, says that the two of them are very boring, and asks them to let her finish drawing her runes, and then Zhao tells Su Liu to go to hell. However, she doesn't give a damn what he's saying, and so, with the tips of her two fingers, she simply forms a blue-colored energy, and then she says that's enough for them, and the energy, which was small, suddenly becomes huge, and then she shrinks it down to a medium-sized ability, and then the two of them try to attack her, causing a huge explosion, and then the two of them bury their swords in the ground and hold on, waiting for the dust to settle, and Song thinks and at the same time wonders if it worked. But there was Bai's disciple, completely unharmed. She begins to form blue birds with her energy, and Liu also says that it's time to take this more seriously, and then she throws the blue birds at the two boys, who are completely stunned by such energy and are hit with everything, and Bai just watches Su Liu, and then the young protagonist thinks that the thunder element, the snake's gallbladder, is of the wood element, and he thinks that it won't be of much use to her, and apparently he will need to go to the kangaroo abyss again and find a realm-breaking object of the thunder attribute for her. And then, with the two of them toasted on the ground, looking like a barbecue, the girl says that it's over, and then Song shouts, calling out to his younger brother, whose name is He, and asks him if he's not going to do anything, because they've only come all that way because of him, leaving he completely shocked. He gets nervous and tries to find something to say, and at the same time, he thinks that Song Lang is a bastard, because unfortunately, he said his name, and then he looks at Su Liu and thinks that they weren't able to beat her, and then he wonders what made them think that he would be able to do it himself. And at that moment, the girl simply unleashes a spell with those rays of hers until he hits him, who doesn't understand. He just watches, and then he looks at where it hit him and thinks, and at the same time wonders why that damned girl had cast a seal on him, and at that, Liu, seeing that, thinks without understanding a bit that she aimed at Song Lang and wonders if that was a miscalculation. And then Bai tells Liu to back off at that moment, and she says that it's okay, and Song Lang quickly stands up, saying that this was a serious provocation, telling Bai that he had ignored his disciple's crime and retaliated against the law enforcement hall, and this won't go unpunished. Bai will regret regret what he did, and Bai wonders if he will regret it. He scratches his ear with his finger and sure that he won't regret it one bit. He tells Song Lang that the three of them should regret it, and Song Lang, in shock and wide-eyed, asks Bai what he's talking about, and then Bai tells them to kneel down, and he makes a gesture with his hand, pointing downwards, and then, suddenly, a very strong pressure hits Song, Zhao and he, making them all quickly kneel on the ground. Suddenly, several thunderclaps start to fall from the clouds, and he, witnessing all this, comments that this is impossible and wonders how someone at the stage of rotating light can have such a threatening spiritual kai. And then Bai comments that they are at King Luin Peak, and then he shouts, saying that he can't believe Bai meant that he's already recovered, and Song tries to get up, still crouching. He comments that Bai hasn't recovered yet. The academy instructors manage to borrow the spiritual kai from their peaks, and suddenly he sees the token glowing, and Song doesn't understand, wondering about Elder 2, about the reason for such an hour, and suddenly he starts bleeding from the mouth, and at that, they quickly start fleeing the scene, and Bai tells his disciple that he will let them flee in consideration of Elder 2, and as for they will stay there kneeling until veteran Yu comes to talk to him personally. Then the scene changes to the crossbow training department, and they ask if there have been any problems in his absence, and he asks what happened, and Song, with his hands clasped together, says that's what happened, explaining it to Deputy Instructor Cheng, and the man with the little mustache asks if Zhang Sheng is still kneeling in front of King Luin Peak, and Song says yes, he is. That man is the Deputy Instructor of the crossbow training department, called Cheng Kun, and Cheng tells the two of them that they can go back to the law enforcement hall and he'll sort it out personally, at which point Song says that in that case, they'll leave, bowing her head to them, at which point Song turns away with a smile on his face, thinking that even if Bai Luochen has the King Luin Peak, he's no match for someone who's in the realm of the exit opening. And then Cheng Kun tells Yin Hai that they're going to King Luin Peak tomorrow night to bring back his foolish older brother, and Yin Hai replies that it's fine. Then it's morning and Bai is having a meal, and at the same time he thinks that it's been a long time, and he wonders if no one from the beast training department is coming, so he finishes his meal and puts the hashi in the bowl, and then he walks over and opens the door. And then he sees Liu training with a blue energy at her fingertips, and so, taking advantage of the moment, he simply throws the wood towards her to see if she's smart, and quickly, the girl simply breaks all the wood that could hit her, and at that, he says it's not bad at all, saying that she kept the seal, even maintaining a surprise attack, and she's very happy about that. And then he tells his disciple that he'll have to go away, and if anyone from the beast training department shows up, she should use that talisman, so he hands it to her, and she answers the master by telling him not to worry, she'll stop anyone who tries to cause trouble. And then Bai starts flying and tells her to take care of the place, because he'll be back early tomorrow morning. And Liu asks the master to have a safe journey. The Kangaroo Abyss is the residence of demonic tribes and beasts. The further one goes into the abyss, the more powerful the demons and beasts are. There was the Immaculate Summit, the Pillar of the Coiled Dragon, the Valley of the Nine Layers, Vertigante Cliff, and King Hong Academy, and in its depths reside the 12 ancestral demons that even people in the Mahayana realm avoid. And at that moment, the protagonist was flying, until he lands on a high peak, and he thinks that at Liu's current level of cultivation, it's still not necessary to kill an ancestral demon. He'll try to find something milder to help her with her cultivation, but he tells himself that finding something suitable will be complicated, and he'll just ask one of the spirit kings of the thunder element for something. And at that, several thunders fall in that place, until he sees a girl downstairs, completely frightened, and he wonders what a girl from the academy has come to do there, and suddenly, several purple flames start to approach her, and he becomes absurdly disgruntled, thinking that it's one problem after another, and so he quickly summons a rune, and thinks he'd better go and have a look. And at that moment, the girl is being hit, and a man laughs, saying that she doesn't have any more tricks up her sleeve. And then, the girl puts 2 fingers of her hand on her own forehead, and then, a green energy begins to emerge, and she speaks with full conviction that he will not touch her, even if she, Yun Ruo, has to die for it. However, before she could defend herself, the man advances on her with everything. With his gigantic hand, he grabs the girl's head while exhaling a purple energy, and the poor girl thinks, and at the same time wonders if her spiritual power has been sealed. And at that, the man seemed to be enjoying himself in that terrible situation. He laughs and comments that her face is soft, and he bets that she must take very good care of her health to have a soft face like that. And at that moment, the girl remembers her older sister well, facing that thug, and she thinks, as if he were talking to her, that she is about to be killed by that man who has no scruples whatsoever. And suddenly, Ba, with energy exuding from his entire body, comments that he has hit the brute's danjang point, and at that, the girl is completely confused, without understanding anything. With her eyes wide, showing a lot of surprise, she thinks that she can move, and then, quickly, she prepares a blow to hit that brute, while he thinks and at the same time wonders why he can't move. And then the girl hits the brute with everything, with a blow so strong that it makes him crawl until he hits a tree. She is really confused by what she has just done. She didn't expect that she would hit that man so hard, and then the boy who was with the brute runs up to him, shouting and calling him boss, and then the girl thanks him for his help, calling Ba a veteran. And at that, he sits there, a little uncomfortable, and thinking that she's leaning towards nothing, and at that, he wonders if all the students under Sister Yu's tutelage act like that, until suddenly, the boy who's with the thug calls the girl a bastard and says that she'll pay for what she's done, and at that, the girl thinks, regretting that she doesn't have much spiritual energy left at the moment. She tries to summon her energy with her fingertips, but it's really weakened, and she tells the boy that he should try his luck if he has the courage, and then the boy tells her to stop bluffing, going towards her with a blue energy in his palm, and also saying that he knows she has already used all the spiritual energy she had in that attack, and so he will kill her right then and there. She asks the veteran, who is Ba, what he would do now, and he tells her to take a step to the left and hit the acupuncture point of the kidneys. Ba was invisible so as not to cause problems for him for having helped that girl, and after she tried to hit him, he quickly managed to dodge her attack, and the girl was confused, not understanding what had just happened, and the boy, emanating a lot of blue energy around his body, asked the girl if she thought it would be that simple to hit him, and then he shouted at her to go to hell, and just as she was about to be hit, a finger snapped, and suddenly the boy was captured by several chains that were holding him down, and then she hears Ba telling her to go ahead and kill him, and then the girl speaks to Ba, referring to him as a veteran, and says that the man in chains knows the whereabouts of her older sister, and asks if she can take care of him after finding out where she is, and then she looks around, because Ba couldn't be seen. After all, he wanted to avoid any major problems at that moment, and at that, the boy tells her not to waste her time, in order not to be harmed. Her older sister simply blew up her oceanic energy and ran away, and since she destroyed her ocean of Kai, he bets that she was devoured by the insects of the Kangwu abyss, and at that, the girl shouts at the boy in chains, telling him to stop lying, because her older sister would never lose to someone like him, and then the man in chains tells her to kill him right away if she has the courage, because he'd like to see if the Shapeless Border sect is going to let this go, and then she asks what he's talking about, and also asks if he's saying that he's part of the Shapeless Border sect, until suddenly Ba appears, calling the boy in chains a miserable wretch with his hair split down the middle, and the girl gets very excited listening to Ba talk, and even referring to him as a veteran, and suddenly, he appears to everyone and asks the split-haired boy what the Northern Kingdom's Shapeless Boundary sect sent him there for, and the split-haired boy asks Ba how he came to be there, and at this, the protagonist is surprised, saying that then, the boy knows him and asks if he's that famous, and the girl is extremely shocked and wide-eyed, thinking and at the same time wondering if the person who was secretly helping her was the useless Ba Luin. At this, the boy asks how this could be possible. He tells Ba that he's just a piece of garbage in the rotating light stage, and at this, Ba approaches the boy with a yellow light on the tip of his finger and says that he doesn't want to waste time interrogating the boy and tells him to open his mouth soon, and at this, the boy answers Ba, saying that he's not going to say anything, and at this, Ba says that everything is fine and gives him an eternal goodbye, making the boy simply explode. There was blood everywhere, and as a result, the girl becomes completely enraged with Ba, calling him Big Brother Ba, and asking how she's going to find her big sister now, since he ended up killing the boy, and Ba answers her, saying that he knows she's worried about her big sister, but she should calm down, and he also says that he knows how to find her big sister, and then he asks if the girl has something of her older sister's. Something she wore recently would be great for him, and the girl shows him a scarf and tells the protagonist that that scarf her older sister had embroidered for her, and then, using his seals and runes, the protagonist summons a firebird and hands it the scarf, asking that bird to find who embroidered the scarf, and then the girl, with a smile on her face, tells the bird that she's counting on him and asks the bird to find find out the whereabouts of her older sister. And then the bird flies off in search of who had embroidered the scarf until he arrives at a huge hole and begins to descend little by little, going from rock to rock, and there at the bottom is the girl, and she thinks that she would never have imagined that she would fall there after escaping from those wretches. And at that critical moment, when the young woman found herself at the bottom of a hole only 6 meters deep, but which seemed to her to be an endless abyss, her mind was taken over by a whirlwind of thoughts. With her body covered in wounds, her vital energy weakened, and her ocean of Kai completely destroyed, she felt as if this was her final tomb, the place where her journey would come to an end. She breathed heavily, struggling to stay conscious, while her mind wandered, full of uncertainties and worries. Among these dark thoughts, a single question kept coming up. Is Yanruo safe? The doubt about her younger sister's whereabouts and safety was like a flame that still raged inside her, preventing her from giving up completely. Suddenly, a familiar sound ripped through the silence of the moment. A high-pitched voice full of emotion echoed through the hole. It was Yanruo, who was shouting with all the breath she had, asking her older sister if she was down there. The unexpected shout made the wounded young woman open her eyes quickly, and for an instant, hope shone in her heart. Still a little incredulous, she tried to confirm what she had just heard. She asked if it was Yanruo from upstairs. Yanruo smiled very happily, a smile that lit up the whole room, as if it were capable of dispelling the darkness that enveloped the whole. With a contagious joy, she exclaimed to Bai, who was standing next to her, calling him Big Brother Bai, saying that her big sister really is down there. Yanruo's happiness was evident, and listening to her words, Bai said that yes, she really is there, but there was a catch. He said that she was hurt. Yanruo's concern instantly increased, but her determination shone through even more strongly. With enthusiasm, she volunteered to go down to the bottom of the hole to rescue her sister. She told Bai that she would go and get her right away. She was full of conviction at that moment. She declared firmly, but before she could act, Bai raised his hand in a calm but authoritative gesture. He asks her to wait. With a firm tone of voice, he tells her to leave it to him. He'll take care of it for her. At that moment, something extraordinary happened. A blue energy began to emanate from Bai's fingertip, glowing with intensity and pulsating like a small living flame. Yanruo, who was watching everything closely, opened her eyes wide in total amazement. It was as if she was witnessing a miracle before her eyes. In her mind, she wondered incredulously if he was wearing a talisman of suspension. The sight of that blue energy was both fascinating and mysterious, but she knew that Bai had full control over what he was doing. Suddenly, Bai directed the blue energy into the hole where the wounded young woman lay, the glow of that light filling the space, creating a striking contrast with the surrounding darkness. The energy began to approach the young woman, enveloping her in a delicate yet powerful way. With a confused look on her face, she tried to understand what was happening. In her mind, she wondered why there were bubbles appearing in the midst of that blue energy. The bubbles floated lightly around her, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Before she could ask any more questions, the bubbles began to join together, forming a kind of ethereal platform that gently lifted her off the ground. As she was suspended, a feeling of apprehension took hold of her heart. She thought, and at the same time wondered where those bubbles were taking her. Her heart was beating fast at that moment. The bubbles were rising quickly, and the uncertainty made her close her eyes tightly, as if that would protect her from any danger that might arise. But little by little, she realized that she was being led out of the hole, to the surface where the light was stronger, and where familiar voices were waiting for her. When she finally reached the top, Yanruo jumped for joy, her eyes shining with emotion at seeing her older sister free from that place. She said that Bai had succeeded, and she ran towards her sister while the bubbles, in a gentle and controlled way, placed her safely on the ground. As soon as her feet touched the ground, the wounded young woman was immediately wrapped in Yanruo's arms, who hugged her tightly. The girl, with a serene tone of voice, asked Yanruo to stay calm, trying to reassure her younger sister and telling her that she was fine, and everything was going to be fine now. Yanruo, her voice trembling and her eyes filled with tears, could barely contain the emotion of seeing her sister safe. The relief was so great that she couldn't find the words to express her gratitude. Meanwhile, the young woman, who was now out of danger, turned to Bai, her expression filled with deep gratitude. At this, she turned to Bai, calling him Big Brother Bai with a discreet bow, and continued, saying that she was really grateful that he had saved her, and she didn't know how to repay this favor. Yanruo, still moved, followed her sister's example, and also expressed her gratitude to Bai, bowing slightly in a sign of respect, thanking Big Brother Bai, and also saying that she wouldn't know what she'd she'd do without him. Bai, at that moment, just smiled reassuringly, as if for him this was just a simple duty, but his presence emanated an aura that inspired security and admiration. And suddenly, the young man brings out a pill in his hand. He holds out his hand to Yunxi, asking her to consume that pill so that her wounds can be healed, and Yunxi asks Bai if that isn't the Yuan cultivation pill of the 5 elements, and she is reluctant, a little disconcerted. She tells Bai that this is a treasure from the Academy's pill department, and so it is something extremely precious. And then, Bai, hearing her answer, and thinking that she was making small talk, asks if this is the time to think about such things, and also asks Yunxi what's more important, a pill or her life, and he says that besides, he got that pill for free, and so she should just take it, instead of being so reluctant. And then Yun Ruo, next to her, thanks Bai for giving that pill to Yunxi, who is still a little reluctant, and then Yun Ruo takes the pill from the protagonist's hand. Then she gives Yunxi the pill and asks Yunxi if she's feeling better, and suddenly Yunxi is in perfect condition, and she says that's why they say she's a treasure. The wound on her leg had healed immediately, and then she tells Bai, referring to him as Big Brother, that she'll always remember his benevolence and one day she'll repay him for all the help he's given. And then Yun Ruo thanks him again, and the protagonist replies that they don't need to thank him, and also says that they shouldn't even be there with their current level. And then he asks them to tell him what they came to do in the Kangwu Abyss. And then one looks at the other, and the scene suddenly changes. With Liu closing the book, she stretches and says to herself that she has finally finished reading a page of that book. At the same time, she thinks that she's getting the feeling that she's making progress, and she'd better go and cultivate. And she picks up a blue crystal, and she hears a noise and thinks that, as expected, someone has come to cause trouble while her master is away. And a man with very strong energy that even brought down the roofs of the houses floats in the air, and says that Bai Luochen has allowed his disciple to break the rules of the academy, and has also violently resisted the law enforcement hall. And then that man with the thin mustache says that he is Cheng Kun, the Vince instructor of the Beast Training Department, and he asks everyone to leave and accept the punishments that the two of them must receive. Then the scene shifts to where the boy was with the girls. He says that they must be wanting to die and asks why on earth she went into a place where ancient demons reside, and Yunxi, a little shaken, answers the protagonist, saying that it's her fault. She was trying to find materials to repair her master's instrument, and her inconsequence resulted in what happened. At this, the protagonist is suspicious and thinks that there is something wrong with this story, and Yunxi tells him that she was hunting an ice silkworm from the 9th grade nearby, and she may be mistaken, but she believes that the people from the Shapeless Border sect were also after this same creature. And on hearing her say this, he gets a little pensive, and then replies to Yunxi, saying that he doesn't believe that, also saying that it's a mere greater demon from the 9th grade, and he wonders why the sect from the northern part of the kingdom came to the southern part. He thinks about it, and at the same time wonders if she's mistaken, because the silkworm is a greater demon. It's a spirit demon in its mute state, and he wonders if perhaps it's an ancient demon that has cultivated human form. And while he's thinking, his train of thought is interrupted by Yuo Ruo, who asks him if he's going to catch the ice silkworm, and the protagonist answers the girl, saying that he will. He explains that it is an extremely rare demonic beast that possesses the attributes of water and thunder, and his disciple is on the verge of breaking. She needs a material of the thunder attribute. The ice silkworm is a perfect item for this, and then he starts walking and tells them that they need to go, because he needs to return before dawn is complete. And at this, Yuo Ruo comments to Yunxi that Bai treats his disciple very well. Yunxi, observing the attitude of her younger sister, Yuo Ruo, realized something that caused her some discomfort. It was clear that Yuo Ruo was overcome by a feeling of envy, something that, in a way, also seemed to be reflected in herself. Even though she was reluctant to admit it, this perception bothered her, but instead of confronting the situation in a more reflective way, Yunxi reacted impulsively. Without hesitating, she raised her hand and punched Yuo Ruo lightly on the head. The gesture, although full of disapproval, also carried a touch of affection. Yunxi asking her to stop talking nonsense, her voice full of irritation, saying that in fact their master always treats them both very well. There is no reason for Yuo Ruo to think that way. Meanwhile, in a completely different setting, on the legendary Kingluan Peak, the atmosphere was full of tension and hostility. Cheng Kun, known for his authority and explosive temper, raised his voice in deafening shouts, impatiently demanding that Bai Luochen appear before him. His posture was that of someone someone who wouldn't allow himself to be contradicted, and his tone showed not only discontent, but also a deep desire to impose himself, the echoes of his voice vibrating throughout the place, until, suddenly, the main door opened with a sound that broke the momentary silence. To his surprise, it wasn't Ba Luin who appeared, but young Liu, a dedicated disciple full of determination. She walked over with measured steps and an upright posture, carrying a serene countenance, but with her eyes shining with courage, her hands clasped together in a respectful gesture, and her voice, when addressing the veteran Cheng Kun, was soft but firm. She said she was sorry, bowing her head slightly, and also said that her master was absent at the moment. However, she was available to pass on to her master any message that you, as a veteran, wished to leave for him. Liu's words, however, were not enough to calm Cheng Kun. On the contrary, they seemed to stoke his anger even more. He was not a man to listen to excuses, nor did he accept being contradicted. Telling the girl to kneel down immediately, that was his order. His voice at that moment sounded like thunder. Liu, however, was not intimidated. With the same serenity she had with herself, she replied that, with all due respect, she had done nothing wrong and therefore she saw no reason to kneel. Cheng Kun didn't accept the answer. He was simply incredulous at what he had just heard, and his expression became even more severe. He told the girl that she should prostrate herself in the presence of someone older and more experienced than her, his fury growing by the moment, and he, as if unable to contain his anger, added in a tone of contempt that this is what it is like to be a disciple of a piece of trash like Ba Luin. He hasn't taught her even the most basic rules of the academy. Liu, however, even as she saw him becoming more and more enraged, remained steadfast. Her serene countenance never wavered, and her voice, when she replied, was filled with respect, but also with firmness. She apologized for her ignorance, calling him veteran Cheng and also saying that she didn't know such a rule existed, but asked him please not to talk about her master like that, because to her, he's not garbage. She paused for a moment, before adding with a slightly pleading tone that she would like to ask, with all due respect, that Cheng be more careful when talking about him. These words seemed to ignite Cheng Kun's anger even more. An intense aura of green energy began to emanate from his body, enveloping him like a storm about to explode. His eyes shone with a sinister light as he, now with a dark and threatening tone of voice, he declared that the girl is very insolent, and asking how dare she, a mere newly admitted disciple, challenge a vice instructor. He raised his hand, now completely enveloped in vibrant green energy, and with a sudden movement, launched a gigantic hand of energy towards Liu, shouting for her to kneel. The impact was devastating. The force of that energy was such that, when it hit the ground, it left a clear mark in the shape of the hand. Liu was hit full on, being thrown to the ground with force. Her body was bruised, and it was clear that the pain was intense. Yet even though she was wounded, she raised her head, her gaze full of determination. Her voice trembling but firm, she declared that she had done nothing wrong, and she wasn't going to kneel down. Cheng Kun watched the young woman with incredulity. Her resistance seemed defiant beyond what he imagined possible. With a tone of disdain, he said that whatever, he wanted to see how far her stubbornness could go, and his eyes, now glowing intensely in a menacing shade of green, seemed to reflect an uncontrolled fury. The energy around him became even more intense, transforming the environment into a whirlwind of power. He raised his hands again and began to launch a sequence of attacks on Liu, each one more powerful than the last. The green hands of energy appeared like a swarm, and with each new attack, he shouted, demanding that she kneel. When the dust finally began to settle, Cheng Kun stopped, his breathing heavy and his expression full of doubt. He didn't understand how Liu was still resisting. His eyes were fixed on the place where she had fallen, expecting to see her submission. However, what he saw left him perplexed. An intense golden energy began to emanate from Liu's body. It was as if she was awakening something that had been dormant until then. The young woman, even though wounded, stood up slowly, and the aura that enveloped her seemed to defy all expectations. Liu's resistance was something that Cheng Kun couldn't ignore, and completely wounded, she didn't give up. She maintained her posture, without kneeling down and with a strong blue energy exuding from her body. And at that, Cheng was very upset, thinking that in order to avoid kneeling, she had burnt her kingdom, and he also thought that this disciple was really obstinate. If something like this got out, it could end up damaging the prestige of the beast training department. And then he realized that she couldn't live, so he pointed to the boy next to him, who was called Yin Hai, and ordered him to kill Liu, at which point the boy asked Cheng, calling him master, if he was sure about it, at which point Cheng told the boy to do what he ordered, at which point he asked him if he wasn't going to do it and disobey his master's orders. And then Yin Hai answers old Cheng's, saying that his disciple would never do anything like that, and explains that it's just that he doesn't think his little sister has done anything that deserves the death penalty, and asks Cheng Kun to let him talk to her, and also says that they don't need to kill the girl if she admits the mistakes she's made. And then the girl looks at the two of them, who were high up in the air, and comments that she would never have imagined that a garbage master like him would be able to produce such an honorable disciple. And then the Yin Hai starts flying, descending to where the girl is, and she thinks that she won't hold her tongue, and if she doesn't die today, she's sure that she'll make them regret everything they're doing in the future. And then the Yin Hai gets close to her, refers to Liu as her younger brother, and says that his master is someone very proud, and he'll let it go if she gets down on her knees and admits the mistakes she's made. He continues, as he lands on the ground, that it's not worth risking her life for the sake of pride, and she replies that she didn't expect that the most prestigious department in the southern kingdom of Yunawang would have a worm like his master. And at that, Yin Hai answers Liu, asking her why she's going so far, and the girl asks him to stop talking and says that if his master wants to kill her, he could go ahead, and she won't beg for mercy. And Yin Hai tells Liu that he's sorry because he can't disobey the orders his master gives him, and she thinks that she should apologize because her technique was reserved for his master's garbage. And he starts preparing an attack with green energy, just like his master, and she prepares an attack with her hand behind her back so that Yin Hai can't see what she's preparing, until suddenly, as the boy was about to hit the girl, the horse suddenly appears and runs him over with everything, making him fly so hard that he hits the wall, destroying it in the same second. With one attack from the horse, he was already defeated. And at that, the girl is extremely surprised, and at that, Cheng Kun thinks that this is why Hen Sheng is obsessed, because that horse is a demonic spirit. At that, a very strong purple energy emanated from the horse, and at that, the girl shouted for the horse, who was called Xiao Wu. And at that moment, Cheng Kun said that he wouldn't even have remembered Xiao Wu if he hadn't simply butted in, and butting in was entirely the horse's choice, and he shouldn't blame Cheng for that, who threw a blow in the horse's direction, shouting at him to behave. That magic he used was to lasso the horse, as if it were a rope, and at that moment, Liu became desperate, saying that he couldn't take Xiao Wu, and at that, the horse started to get furious, slamming its legs on the ground, and at that, Cheng went up to the horse and shouted, telling the horse to die, calling it an evil beast, and then, he hit the horse with everything he had, causing part of the poor horse's body to break. And the girl, seeing all this, started to cry. With a trembling voice, she calls out the horse's name, and at that, she becomes extremely angry and tells Cheng Kun that he'd better kill her, calling him an old man because he could be sure that she'll make him pay for what he's done. And suddenly, a very strong green energy begins to exude from that man, and he quickly approaches Liu and tells her that it's all right and he'll fulfill her request. And then, the girl thinks that this is great and the distance is perfect, and from that distance, it is certain that the Moon Fairy's wheel will hit the target. And then, she prepares to launch the attack on the boy, and she also thinks that she had burned her kingdom so that she could finish him off using that technique. And then, she launches that attack on Old Man Cheng, hitting him, and then, he thinks that it was very good that he came prepared. And then, he thinks that he would have died in a silly way if he hadn't brought a treasure with him. And then, he keeps running the tip of his finger with some energy on his neck, and also, he thinks that she has some tricks up her sleeve, and that's why she managed to fight Song Lang and the two good-for-nothings, and he thinks of nothing else but that Liu needs to die. And at that moment, Liu was breathing heavily, and she thought that her spiritual energy had run out, and suddenly, Cheng Kun used the same skill that he had used on the horse against Liu, tying her up, and then he pulled her, asking her to come closer, and then he quickly grabbed the girl's neck, and then she grabbed Cheng's hand that was holding her by the neck and said that her master wasn't going to let this go. At this, Cheng Kun, with a smile on his face, tells the girl that he also planned to kill Bai, referring to him as a piece of trash, and also saying that Bai means nothing to him. And suddenly, the horse, completely trembling, gets up and then starts running towards Cheng Kun, and the girl shouts for Xiao Wu, telling him not to come and that he should run away at that moment. At that, Cheng Kun looks at Xiao Wu and tells the horse that he's going to kill the girl and then teach him a good lesson. And at that moment, the girl was being held by the neck and could only think of her master, and at that, she remembers when her master said that he would have to go away for a while, and if someone from the beast training department showed up, she could use that talisman, and then hands it to her. And then she picks up the paper and throws it at Cheng Kun. Cheng-kun, and he looks doubtful and then asks her, with a smile on his face, if she thinks that little piece of paper will make any difference at that height, until suddenly, the paper creates a huge beam of light and suddenly an explosion happens, leaving Cheng-kun surprised and making him move away from the girl, and at that, the girl starts coughing. After all, being held by the neck brought an uncomfortable feeling. Suddenly, a blue bird appears and Cheng angrily asks what the hell it was, until suddenly, his mouth hanging open. The bird simply explodes behind Cheng-kun, leaving him on the ground, and at that moment, the item he had brought broke in the middle of the explosion and Yin Hai quickly sees his master on the ground and goes over to him, shaking a lot and asking if his master is alright. The old man was lying on the ground, completely exhausted and wounded. His clothes were torn and covered in dust, while his body shook with exhaustion. His countenance was pale, and he clearly felt the effects of the blows he had suffered earlier. Even in that deplorable condition, his eyes still reflected an unshakable stubbornness and a burning anger. It was at that moment that his young disciple, overcome by a mixture of despair and concern, quickly approached. Kneeling down next to his master, with effort, he helped him up a little, supporting him carefully. The disciple's voice was hurried and full of distress as he said to his master that please, they needed to go back now, as his injuries are too serious and it's not safe to continue. He continues, saying that his master needs to recover before trying anything else, the words coming out almost as a bit of desperation, evidencing his deep concern for Cheng's condition. However, Cheng, despite all the pain and injuries that marked his body, had no intention of backing down. He interrupted his disciple with a deafening shout. His voice was firm at that moment, falling like thunder through the place. He asked his disciple to shut up immediately. He didn't want him to say anything else. His expression was filled with fury as he continued, saying that that insolent girl needed to be taught a lesson, right there and now. As he spoke, his voice became more and more intense, revealing the depth of his indignation. He then turned to his disciple and, without hesitation, ordered him to quickly hand over the 5-element pill. The young man hesitated for a brief moment, looking at his master with wide eyes. He clearly didn't agree with Cheng's attitude, but he knew he had no choice but to obey. With trembling hands, he pulled a pill out of his robes and handed it to his master, who took it quickly and decisively. Cheng put the pill in his mouth and, with a single movement, swallowed it whole. The effect was almost immediate. A powerful energy began to flow through Cheng's body, restoring his vitality and closing his wounds. It was as if he had been completely revitalized, and now his presence seemed even more threatening. He stood up firmly, his eyes were shining with determination. He declared that he refused to believe, with a voice full of conviction, that an instructor like him, with his power and position, wouldn't be able to discipline a mere girl. A disciple who had just entered the academy couldn't challenge him like that. Without any more hesitation, he advanced against Su Liu, his body moving like a storm about to destroy everything in its path. Meanwhile, Liu was sitting on the ground, still extremely weak from the injuries she had suffered, her body trembling with weakness, and her mind plunged into confused thoughts, thinking and at the same time wondering if this is how it all ends for her. As she watched Cheng approach with a deadly aura, but to her surprise, the blow never came. Cheng had suddenly stopped, as if something invisible had prevented him from moving forward. Liu, confused, opened her eyes and saw something she had never expected. A man was standing in front of her, protecting her. It was Ba Luin, her master, who had arrived at the last moment. His presence was like a beacon of hope in the midst of darkness, and Liu felt a wave of relief wash over her heart. Bai didn't say a single word. He just raised his hand, summoning a shadowy clone of himself, which immediately advanced against Cheng. The clone held him firmly, immobilizing him. Cheng struggled desperately, his fists shaking as he tried to free himself, but it was useless. The clone's strength was unshakable. Meanwhile, Bai turned to his disciple. He knelt beside her and, with a gentle gesture, touched her with his fingertips. A soft light began to emanate from his hand as he concentrated on healing her wounds. Liu tried to speak. She wanted to thank him for being there, but Bai interrupted her with a gentle gesture, asking her not to speak now. His voice was calm and firm, and at that, he explained that her body and heart had suffered a great blow and she needed to rest and recover. After ensuring that Liu was stable, Bai turned his attention to Cheng. His expression became stern, and his voice carried an overwhelming authority as he began to speak. He told Cheng that he had taken advantage of his absence to threaten his disciple, and at that, he asked what kind of vice instructor of the beast training department would dare to do something so despicable. Without giving Cheng a chance to reply, Bai ordered his clone to grab Cheng by the the face and lift him into the air. The old man continued to struggle but was unable to free himself. Bai continued, saying that Cheng doesn't deserve the title he carries, for his behavior is shameful. With a sudden movement, Bai's clone slammed Cheng's head against the ground with overwhelming force, spraying blood everywhere. Cheng, dazed and bloodied, was confused and incredulous. He thinks he is one of the 5 best instructors in the academy, trying to understand what was going on. He also thinks he is at the stage of opening and leaving. As Cheng was consumed by these thoughts, Ba Luin's clone raised his fist again, preparing to deliver the final blow. The shadowy figure emanated an aura of imminent destruction, and Cheng, realizing he had no escape, felt the weight of despair bear down on him. And then Yin Hai just puts his hand to his face, witnessing all this happening, and then he shouts for his grandmaster, asking the clone to stop hitting Cheng, and meanwhile Bai is using magic to heal his disciple. And then he asks the golden bell to do his bidding, and suddenly the golden bell just traps Yin Hai, and at that moment Bai's dark clone continues punching, while Yin Hai watches on, unable to do anything. At this, Cheng thinks that the miserable Bai is also healing him, while he beats him up so that he can continue to take the beating, and he thinks that this is such a humiliation. And at this, the clone simply finishes with one last blow, and at this, he grabs Cheng by the head and drags him away, and at the same time, the clone says that they should be grateful to the leader of the academy and his big brother, Lai Guanqi. He wouldn't kill them both because of them. And then he throws Cheng like a disposable cup at Yin Hai and tells him to take his master and disappear from King Luin Peak. And then Yin Hai gets very worried, holding his master, and then his master is all bloody and his voice is shaking, talks about the 5-element pill, and Yin Hai is confused at that moment, so he takes the 5-element pill and asks him to eat it slowly, because they would go away as soon as he finished eating the pill, and when he eats it, the pill quickly makes him recover completely. At this, Cheng Kun asked Yin Hai what he meant by leaving, and he went on to say that the wretch had only taken him by surprise, and he went on to tell Yin Hai that his master hadn't yet shown him his abilities, and he asked him to give him his storage ring. And meanwhile, Liu apologized to her master, saying that she couldn't protect King Luin Peak satisfactorily, and even Xiao Wu got hurt trying to protect her. And at this, Bai's clone was healing the horse, and then the protagonist tells Liu that it's not her fault, and she's done what she can, and the most important thing at the moment is to repair her meridians, and she's going to feel a slight sting and asks her to hang in there, and she says it's okay, and then the scene changes to Cheng Kun telling Yin Hai to look at it. There was a gigantic half-centaur eagle, and Cheng Kun had even changed his clothes using the storage ring. With a smile on his face, he told his disciple that that was the real power he possessed, and he introduces that weird eagle, saying that it's the most powerful guardian beast he possesses, a demonic spirit from the 8th grade, a griffin with horns, and then he says that now they're going to see if Bai will continue to ignore him, until suddenly, the eyes of the protagonist's blue bird start to glow inside a sack, and his glowing eyes alone were enough to make that centaur eagle completely scared. Frightened to the point of simply running out of feathers, she quickly starts to run away, and Cheng Kun becomes furious, shouting for her to go back, and at that, the girl starts waving to Bai, saying that they had arrived, and Yunxi stares off into the distance, wondering what has happened there, and at that, Bai says that they have arrived on time and asks them to take care of Liu instead of him, and Bai says that because he didn't want to get into any trouble with anyone, he had kept to himself on King Luin Peak for several years, and in return for them continuing to come there looking for trouble, to the point of trying to kill his disciple, he now simply wanted blood. And at this, Cheng gets desperate and talks about the talisman of the rapture of blood and asks if Ba Luin has gone mad, and then he jumps, flying. He thinks that that talisman turns anyone into a mere pool of blood, and then, as he flies, trying to escape from that place, Bai's clone quickly catches up with him, and then Cheng thought that he couldn't die there in any way, but he just gets punched with everything from Bai's clone, making him quickly fall. He hits the ground with everything, looking like a meteorite. At this, he is in complete shock, and then, frozen to the ground, he tells Bai that they both taught at the same academy, and also that Bai will suffer divine punishment if he uses the talisman of the rapture of blood on him, and Bai wonders what he means by divine punishment, because he himself is the divine punishment, and then he prepares the talisman of the rapture of blood and throws it towards Cheng Kun, leaving him completely shocked at that moment. He starts crying and even phlegm comes out of his nose. He asks her to please keep the talisman away from him, but there's no point in asking, and then we see the moment that Liu had activated the talisman. The protagonist says he's done. He'd managed to solve what he had to solve until he sees that Liu is in danger because she's activated the talisman, and then he came back with all the speed he had, thinking that he had to hurry, and at that moment, Yin Hai was open-mouthed, witnessing the whole scene, and then the talisman simply enveloped Cheng Kun's whole body and Ba Luin snapped his finger, leaving only Cheng Kun's clothes in place. His body had completely disappeared, and then Yunxi thought that only the clothes were left. The talisman of the rapture of blood was really something terrible in her vision, and Yunruo was nauseous watching it happen, and suddenly, Yin Hai was on the ground, shaking a lot and calling for his master, and Bai was telling Yin Hai that he tried to avoid it, but he didn't have a choice. In fact, Cheng Kun insisted a lot until it all happened, and then, with his eyes welling up with tears, Yin Hai called Bai his grand master, his voice shaking a lot, and at that moment, Bai raises his hand, with a red energy around it, and Yin Hai breaks out in a cold sweat, thinking that it was time for Bai to simply take his life. But Bai says that he doesn't like to kill in a discriminating way, and Yin Hai should take that as a lesson. If he wants a master in the future, he should remember to get someone who at least has a character. The young man, realizing that at that moment his life had been spared, didn't hesitate to show his gratitude and relief. With a quick, reverent movement, he bowed deeply to the ground, his forehead almost touching the ground in a sign of respect and submission, the tension in his shoulders slowly easing as his trembling voice whispered thanks. He looked up at the protagonist, his eyes shining with a mixture of awe and relief at being alive. The protagonist, with a serious and authoritative look, spoke firmly that he didn't want anyone to know what had happened there today. His voice sounded like an irrefutable order, loaded with a tone that left no room for questioning. He then turned directly to Yin Hai, who was still recovering from the impact of recent events, and continued, telling him to make sure he takes his older brother, who is kneeling in front of the gate, making it clear that he is not to leave him behind. After hearing these words, Yin Hai, still visibly shaken, bowed once again in reverence. With a respectful and desperate tone, he thanked Bai, saying that he would never forget what Bai had done today. This disciple would carry it in his heart forever. Meanwhile, Ba Luin turned his attention to his disciple, Su Liu. He approached her with a softer expression, indicating that, for the moment, the critical situation had passed. The young woman, trying to find some peace after the whirlwind of events, was gently stroking Xiao Wu's horse. Nearby, the two young girls, Yunruo and Yunxi, were observing the interaction between Bai and Liu. Yunruo, with a thoughtful look on her face, turned to her older sister and suggested that they leave. She thought the two of them had seen enough for today. With her voice in a low but firm tone, the suggestion took Yunxi by surprise, and for a moment, she was confused, looking at Yunruo as if she didn't fully understand why she was in such a hurry. Even so, Yunxi turned to Bai and said that they were already going, and thanked Bai for everything he had done today. His actions were really extraordinary. Yunruo then also expressed her gratitude, saying that they are deeply grateful for what he has done, and they will certainly visit Bai again in the future. Bai waved to them, being very welcoming. He says that they are always welcome, and they don't forget to send a greeting to Sister Yu when they return, referring to Su Liu. Liu, who was listening attentively, couldn't help feeling a slight worry. Her gaze followed the two girls as they walked away, and in her mind, a persistent question echoed, if perhaps they were going to become regulars at Kingyuan Peak. The thought caused a slight discomfort, something that Bai quickly realized. The protagonist, intrigued by the expression on his disciple's face, became doubtful. He snapped his fingers to get her attention and said with a slight smile that first he'll change his clothes, and then they can talk. However, before he could walk away, something caught his attention. A strange presence seemed to be hanging around. It was as if a reddish vision was hovering over them. Observing both Bai and the horse Xiao Wu and Su Liu, the protagonist felt this presence and slowly raised his eyes to try to locate the source of it. Liu, noticing that her master was staring upwards, worriedly asked her master if he had seen anything in the sky. His voice was cautious, almost fearful. Quickly, Bai looked away and replied with apparent tranquility that it was nothing, and she shouldn't worry, but, in his mind, he had already understood what was going on. He thought that, as he had imagined, someone was spying on Kingyuan Peak. Suddenly, the scene changed. The place Bai had been looking at moments before revealed itself. A dark and sinister cave, illuminated only by the pulsating light of a red crystal that was completely cracked at that moment. In front of this crystal, an eccentric-looking old man, with a long, unkempt beard and eyes reddened with rage, was crying with frustration. He shouted bitterly, calling Ba Luin a cursed man and asked how he dared to use such a vile method to end his nephew's life. The place was known as the Seclusion Cave, a dark place where the old man took refuge. He paced back and forth, his anger boiling over. In the midst of this, he stopped suddenly and turned to a man who was kneeling in front of him, saying that if he esteems this disciple of his so much, with his tone full of menace, he asked the boy if he knew what needed to be done in this year's exam. The man leaned even closer, showing absolute submission, and replied in a firm voice that yes, and he shouldn't worry. That old man was the supreme leader, and he also said that he would do exactly as ordered. The old man smiled darkly, his eyes shining with a mixture of vengeance and cruelty, and he said that this was good, because Ba Luin would pay for his actions. And then the man said that the law enforcement department had already prepared everything, that this was Tu Wang Sheng, and he was the law enforcement elder. And then the scene changes. The protagonist says that he had almost forgotten and says that he has brought something for his disciple, and then a monster appears and Ba comments that this is the ice silkworm that he had captured, and his original plan was to get the frame of a broken mirror, but he ended up bumping into it and decided to bring it along. And the girl stares at that huge creature and thinks that the ice silkworm is a demon king who possesses the strength comparable to a cultivator at the recombination stage, and then she wonders why that creature is so obedient. And at that, Ba continues, saying that the ice silkworm possesses the attribute of lightning and water. It is extremely compatible with Liu. He tells her to let him help her with her cultivation, and she thinks that even though she was an immortal in her previous life, she had a hard time subduing demon kings, and the master gave her one of them as if it was no big deal. She thanks her master for that and hugs him with a smile on her face. Ba pats her on the head, saying that the big test is coming up and so she should get her strength back as soon as possible, and the girl tells her master not to worry because she won't let him down. And Ba goes on to say that she should try to keep calm, as this will end up hindering her in the exam, and she shouldn't forget that she can take the ice silkworm with her. And the girl is impressed, asking her master if this isn't cheating, and Ba replies that she shouldn't worry about it, as he can suppress his realm to a level where she can take him, and in doing so, he modifies the realm of that creature that was the demon king into a superior demon. At this, the girl became a little uncomfortable, thinking and at the same time wondering if he was going to let her master suppress him without even questioning him. And at this, he told the ice silkworm that he was going to suppress his realm. There was a strong yellow energy around Ba's body, and he continued, saying that it might hurt a little because it was the first time, but he could hold on and everything would be fine afterwards. And suddenly, the ice silkworm completely wraps itself in the silk, and at that, the young girl is completely stunned at that moment. Wide-eyed, she thinks, and at the same time wonders if he wasn't going to suppress the creature, and because its cultivation has been enhanced. And at that, the creature is completely wrapped in a circle of silk, and the protagonist says that everything is ready now. Suddenly, that fine silk that had previously seemed immobile and inert began to open slowly, as if it were alive, gradually revealing what was hidden inside. First, a few hands emerged delicately, followed by a glimpse of strands of hair in a vibrant pink hue, which seemed to float gently in the air. Ba's disciple, Su Liu, couldn't contain her astonishment at the unexpected and fascinating sight that was unfolding before her eyes, her thoughts buzzing, her eyes shining with curiosity and admiration, as she watched what appeared to be a figure emerge from the magical silk. The creature finally revealed itself in full, and in a calm, authoritative voice, spoke with a smile that exuded an almost understandable confidence. She said that Demon Queen Mai Meng greeted Miss Su, and asked that please both of you feel free to call her Xiao Meng. The figure in front of him was impressive, and at the same time enigmatic. Its long pink hair flowed like a river of silk under the light, while two black horns stood imposingly on its head, as if they were ornaments. In addition, the creature had 4 slender and graceful arms, which gave it an appearance that was both fascinating and intimidating. Its white garment shone softly, creating a striking contrast with the darker tones of its horns and the intensity of its eyes, which seemed to contain unfathomable secrets. Liu couldn't help but become completely absorbed in the figure in front of her, her heart racing as she thought in admiration of how incredibly beautiful the demon queen was, her eyes never straying from Mai Meng, who, noticing the young woman's stare, returned it with a friendly but slightly enigmatic smile. Liu, for her part, became even more enchanted and began to observe Mai Meng more closely, almost as if she wanted to memorize every detail of her appearance. With her eyes shining with curiosity, the young woman commented in an almost innocent tone that she had always thought that demons had a diabolical, dark, and threatening appearance, but My Ming is completely different from that. My Ming, upon hearing those words, became a little uncomfortable, not knowing exactly how to react to Liu's remark. Her eyes blinked slightly, reflecting a mixture of surprise and hesitation. Despite this, she maintained her smile and watched the young woman with interest. Liu, however, didn't seem to notice the Demon Queen's discomfort and continued to speak, her tone becoming more and more enchanted, saying that it was the first time she had seen such a beautiful transformation, while her eyes roamed over Mai Ming, examining her from every possible angle, as if she wanted to fully understand her unusual beauty. Faced with this, Mai Ming, with her cheeks slightly flushed and a shy smile on her lips, replied in a friendly manner that she must have joined the sect recently, and asked her if she was sure of this, and asked her to say how she had had the chance to meet other demon kings before, her question asked with genuine curiosity, but also with a slight tone of provocation. Liu, however, froze for a moment. The question took her by surprise, and her mind began to run in circles, desperately searching for an answer that would be convincing. Her fingers were touching Mai Ming's horns gently at that moment, as if to make sure it was all real. At the same time, she felt a slight blush creep up her cheeks as she tried to contain her anxiety. Her mind was then flooded with memories of her past life, vivid recollections of how demons were portrayed in a completely different way, with grotesque and threatening appearances. After a moment of silence, she finally found an answer that she considered satisfactory. A little dull, but trying to sound confident, she said that she had seen some images of other demon kings in a book, and that was it. Mai Ming tilted her head slightly in surprise, but accepted the explanation, saying that she understood. So that was that. She seemed satisfied with the answer. Meanwhile, Liu sighed internally with relief, thinking to herself that she had narrowly escaped an embarrassing situation. She thought she was lucky, and was grateful that at least her master hadn't noticed anything. At that moment, Bai Luochen, who had been observing the interaction from a distance, broke the silence with a thoughtful remark. He says that this is very strange, looking at the horizon with an expression of suspicion. Then he raised his hand, and a barrier of blue energy quickly formed around him. He says that he can't ignore it, and he will leave Liu's breakup in Mai Ming's care. Mai Ming, with a warm smile and a slight nod, replied to the protagonist that he can rest assured that she will take care of her and do a good job. She says this with confidence. Bai then looked up at the sky, realizing that the day was already well advanced, and then he said that it was getting late. With a calm but firm tone, he told the two that they should go to their lodgings and rest. With a gentle smile, Mai Ming replied to the protagonist, saying good night to Luochen, wishing him sweet dreams. Her words were accompanied by a slight gesture of farewell as she led Liu to the lodgings, leaving behind the feeling that a new chapter was about to begin for all of them. And then the boy takes some huge carrots and puts them in the horse's food compartment. He thinks that it seems Yun Zai's hunch was correct. The piece of jade that Xiao Meng was trying to protect at all costs was real, the goal of the Shapeless Border sect, and at that, he gets a tiny piece of silk in his hand and also thinks that the system can't analyze that jade. And then he wonders what's so special about her, until with a sudden appearance, the system panel shows that the host has activated a random mission, and if his disciple advances in stage within 5 days and gets first place in the exam, he will be rewarded, and the protagonist is just analyzing. And then the system panel shows more information. The first is the Stellar Martial Arts gift pack, and the second gift package is the special stellar item and a surprise prize, and also makes it clear that if the host refuses or fails the mission, their spiritual kai will be reduced by 30%. The system will judge whether the results are satisfactory, and after seeing that, the protagonist comments that this is a surprise for him, and he didn't know that the system panel also gave out missions, and he thinks that the system panel was just a wood-cutting counter, and the system panel, hearing this, is completely offended, shouting and asking what he meant by just a counter, and Bai is a little confused and then asks the system panel if there is something wrong with him, because he didn't understand very well, and the system panel shouts at him, telling the dear host that please, he should make up his mind whether he would agree to do this or not, and Bai, with little courage, tells him that it's okay, and he accepts, and quickly the system panel disappears, and the protagonist tells himself that those prizes are useless to him, and he will give all those prizes to Liu. With the help of the ice silkworm, she will ascend in no time, and then he goes into his room and quickly lies down on the bed to sleep. He puts on a sleeping mask and soon falls asleep, and suddenly, the system panel comes up, and at that, a creature seeing Bai says to itself that it was a pity because she was was very close, and she says that she would very much like to be with him. Then, 5 days later, after all the terrible mess that had happened, Bai was roasting some meat and some young people were coming up the stairs, and one of them commented that there was someone cooking something that smelled very good, and when they looked, it was Bai Luin, and he was salting the meat just like Salt B does, and Zhang saw this and got completely frustrated and shouted at B, asking what the hell he was doing. And then, the protagonist sees the instructor Zhang and feigns surprise and asks in a completely ironic way if he is interested in the wild game of cooking, and then he remembers what the creature was like, who welcomed him and asked if he would like to hear the words of their Lord and Savior, and then he tells himself that he calls it a game. But what he is not sure of is what that strange bird from the peak of the azure bird was. At this, Zhang points to the staircase and says that that's the way to the academy entrance exam, and he asks the protagonist what he thinks he's doing, and at this, he starts to hear people commenting that that meat smells really good, and he starts to get even more annoyed, and at this, Bai says that he's just cooking there and not even affecting them in any way, while Zhang complains to everyone, telling them to go back and stand in line properly. It's as if Bai's flesh is bewitching all of them, and Zhang comments that what's happening is simply unacceptable and tells the protagonist that someone like him doesn't deserve to have the title of instructor, and Bai doesn't care much about what he says, saying that he already knows about it. And while Liu is going up the stairs, one boy comments to the other that their Beastmaster department is screwed up, and he doesn't know why. But the two leading brothers have gone to do closed-door cultivation out of the blue. At that, the other boy replies that that's where he's wrong. Since they didn't come, they finally have a chance to shine, and at that moment, a man with his eyes closed and a fan in his hand sees Bai's disciple pass by, and he reflects a little on that moment and seeing her with a moth on top of her head. He wonders if that's Liu, and he thinks that her talent isn't bad. It's just a shame that she's Bai's disciple, referring to him as if he were a piece of garbage. That man's name is Fengzhu, and he's part of the extermination department, and he's at the middle stage of the fusion realm, and so, seeing the girl pass by, he goes to say hello to her. Waving his hand, he says good morning to Liu and introduces himself, telling her that he's Fengzhu from the extermination department, and he thinks at the same time that he's going to win her over with his riz. Only then she's going to buy, and so she ignores Fengzhu completely, who screams for her, completely frustrated. She doesn't want to know about him because the smell of the meat is attracting her attention, and she's drooling and her cheeks are blushing. She calls for the master, and the protagonist simply puts his arm in front of her so that she doesn't go for the meat, and at the same time, he asks her to leave because he's very busy at the moment. And then she screams in despair, asking her master what he's doing this time and asks if she could have a bite, and the protagonist tells her that there's no way she could do that. Even if he doesn't know what he's doing, the amount of spiritual kai there is too much for her, and Fengzhu becomes completely demonic, wondering how the girl dares to ignore his riz. Suddenly the beast gets very ugly. Then, suddenly, a man touches Fengzhu on the shoulder. That's the instructor Yu Wangxiang. He's part of the extermination department, and he tells Fengzhu not to get angry about women and asks him to remember one thing. Envy is something that only the weak and incapable feel, and Fengzhu is startled to see that the instructor is there, until one of the guys in the queue asks the staff to see that it's the 4 arts department. It was the girls and the men were shocked, saying that they had looked at them, and then there was the instructor of the 4 arts department. Her name was Moon Xuanju, and then Wangxiang quickly went up to Xuanju and waved to her, saying that it was a coincidence that they had seen each other there, but he was completely ignored. She jumped up, using her energy, and went over to Bai, thanking him for saving her disciples. And then, at that moment, the protagonist, with a smile on his face, begins to laugh in a relaxed way, finding the situation funny, and asks Moon Xuanju, with a curious and amused expression, what exactly she was talking about. Then he looks at Liu and, with a calm and explanatory tone of voice, the revelation surprised the young Liu, who immediately rushed to show respect and politeness, greeting her aunt with a formal gesture and polite words. Instructor Moon, for her part, returned the girl's greeting with a warm smile and a slight nod, while saying a friendly hello to her. However, even as she greeted her, Liu's mind was agitated, full of contradictory thoughts. She found herself reflecting on the situation, trying to understand why yet another woman was present there, around her master. Feelings of jealousy began to arise within her, as she was not at all happy with the constant appearance of other female figures in that environment, which made her insecurity grow with every moment. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, in another part of the place, Wangxiang was visibly irritated, to the point of showing his anger in a physical way, so furious that smoke was coming out of his nostrils, a clear reflection of the exalted state of mind that dominated the boy at that moment. Observing the scene, Feng Zhu, always irreverent and good-natured, didn't miss the opportunity to tease him. With a sarcastic tone and a malicious smile on his face, he asked Wangxiang, recalling a previous situation, if it wasn't he himself who had said that envy was a feeling reserved exclusively for weak and incapable people. Wangxiang, upon hearing Feng Zhu's words, became even more annoyed. He, with an indignant and defensive tone, categorically denied that he was jealous and, with a serious and intense expression, turned the question back to Feng Zhu, challenging him to say whether he really seemed to be showing envy at that moment. It was clear that Wangxiang was trying to hide or justify his feelings, but the intensity of his reaction only made what he was trying to deny even more evident. Until, suddenly, a shout echoed through the place, interrupting all conversations and drawing everyone's attention. The voice came from a mustachioed young man, who seemed to be in charge of the situation. He was standing on a peculiar structure, which drew a lot of attention due to its unusual and almost enigmatic design. With a serious expression and an authoritative posture, he asked everyone to remain silent and look in his direction, to ensure that his voice was heard by everyone. He used a loudspeaker, which amplified his words, making it clear that he had something important to say. With the silence established, he began to speak directly and objectively, announcing that the exam for this cycle would be held in the secret realm, which generated whispers of curiosity and expectation among those present. He continued, explaining that he was there to announce the rules that would govern the exam. Identified as the task elder, he explained in detail that the time limit for the exam would be 2 days, and that the ranking would be determined based on the amount of points accumulated by each participant at the end of the set period. He also detailed the ways of obtaining points, which included searching for hidden treasures, eliminating demons, and the possibility of stealing tokens from other teams, which added a strategic element to the competition. However, he made a point of emphasizing, with a serious and authoritative tone, that any attempt to take the life of another participant would be severely punished. If the all-seeing eye detected such behavior, the offender would be immediately disqualified and would receive an exemplary punishment. After concluding his explanations, the elder declared that the exam was officially underway, at which point a bright and imposing portal opened in the strange structure, signaling the start of the competition. Immediately after the announcement, Feng Zhu, with a contagious energy and a posture of leadership, summoned all the members of the extermination department, ordering them to move immediately. He instructed the group to occupy all strategic and advantageous positions within the secret realm. His words served as a catalyst, causing the participants to rush towards the portal, driven by excitement and the desire to demonstrate their skills, because the exam had barely begun, and everyone was already determined to do their best. At that moment, young Liu, who was watching everything around her carefully, turned her gaze to her master. With a confident and determined smile on her face, she told her master that she was ready to go, demonstrating her determination to face the challenge. The master, with a serene and caring gaze, replied with kind words, asking her to be careful during the exam, conveying both confidence and genuine concern. And then Moon is hugging by, leaving Liu not understanding what the hell is going on there, and she thinks that now she doesn't want to leave. And then Moon tells the protagonist that she heard that not long ago he admitted his first disciple, and then she asks Bai if he's not worried about her, and the protagonist replies that Liu is not only talented, but she's also a hard worker. She's stronger than everyone there, and what's more, she's his disciple, assuring Moon that Liu will do well in the exam. Inside the mysterious secret realm, a young man was in a state of absolute despair, running desperately as he tried to escape from a beam of bright blue light that insisted on chasing him. He was visibly terrified, and as he ran, he talked to himself, trying to understand how he had gotten himself into such a dangerous situation. He remembered hearing rumors about the talisman department, rumors that mocked his strength, and he told himself that they had said that the people in that department were a laughing stock. But now, he wondered how it was possible that a monster like that girl had emerged from there. As the blue beam continued to follow the boy with precision and determination, he stumbled, falling to the ground with a thud. Totally terrified, he began to beg desperately, pleading for the figure responsible for this not to come any closer. However, his pleading was in vain. The force that controlled the lightning advanced with precision, without hesitation, and, in a few moments, the talisman that was in the boy's possession was was snatched away from him. That figure he feared so much was none other than Su Liu, one of the most outstanding figures in the talisman department. At that moment, Su Liu was positioned at number 47 in the exam ranking, a respectable position for someone who was still demonstrating her full potential. By that point in the competition, 6 people had already been eliminated, a reflection of the difficulty and intensity of the exam in the secret realm. Talking to Mai Meng, who was accompanying her, Su Liu was showing frustration. She commented, with a tone of dissatisfaction, that the approach they were using wasn't working, and that everything seemed to be happening too slowly for her liking. While she was pondering how to improve her performance, another contestant was already being eliminated in a dramatic scene, high up in the sky. Without wasting any time, Liu quickly grabbed the moth that was flying next to her and, without hesitation, squeezed the small creature firmly in her hands. Speaking to the moth in a tone of almost complicity, Liu whispered that it was okay, that no one was watching at that moment, and that she should try to speak like normal people, rather than like the great spirits. Mai Meng, still visibly agitated and gasping for breath, reacted with a mixture of irritation and incredulity. With a raised tone of voice, she asked Su Liu if she was trying to kill her. At the same time, Mai Meng explained that Liu's master had instructed her to pretend to be a great spirit, but she made her dissatisfaction clear, asking if Liu had ever met a great spirit who could talk like her. Liu, however, seemed more interested in something she had noticed in the distance. She commented that there was something strange there, and, without giving much importance to the conversation, decided to investigate what was going on. Liu's gaze turned to a nearby mountain, and soon the scene revealed 2 hooded men arguing with each other. One of them, with a hurried tone, told the other that they should be quick and find the necessary path. The second hooded man, however, laughed with satisfaction, saying that he had already found what they were looking for. In his hands he held a red-colored toad, whose appearance was as peculiar as the situation they were in. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the scene shifted to the Academy Square, where a young man was watching what was happening with great concern. He was watching the events of the exam and seemed shocked by the intensity of the competition. Commenting to someone next to him, he said that what he had just witnessed was brutal. He explained that Junior Jiangsu had already given up on the exam, but even so, Su Liu had continued to attack him without hesitation. The boy next to him, sensing his companion's discomfort, covered his eyes with one hand, as if to spare him the intense scenes. This same boy then commented, with a curious tone, that he had heard rumors that the talisman department was led by someone weak. He then wondered how it was possible for the disciple of that supposed leader to be so incredibly powerful. In another corner, the protagonist, Bai, was sitting quietly next to Moon Xuanzhu, his companion and instructor. She, watching the events with interest, commented to Bai that the strength and achievements of his disciple would certainly attract the attention of other departments. Bai, however, seemed completely unconcerned, with a confident expression. He replied to Moon that only the weak cared about the opinions of strangers. In his view, those who possessed true power found confidence exclusively in their own strength. Bai's words, full of conviction, drew a smile from Moon. She elegantly picked up her cup of tea, took a sip, and, still smiling, commented enigmatically that, so far, he was right. She remembers Bai well and comments that he's the same Bai Liuchen from 10 years ago, who climbed into the sky and looked down on the world, and the protagonist says that it's nothing like that and she must be imagining things. Suddenly, the scene changes to a bell ringing, and then the broadcast that people were watching is simply interrupted, and one of the viewers doesn't understand, asking what happened to the broadcast, and at that moment, the old man shouts, asking everyone to be quiet at that moment, and at that, the boy on the left tells Elder Bing that they are witnessing a great shock of spiritual Kai inside the secret realm, and the boy on the left tells the elder that they have lost the connection with the all-seeing eye, and at that, Elder Bing looks at the boy on the left and asks what he means by a great shock of spiritual Kai, and also asks how quickly he thinks he can restore the connection, and the boy replies to Elder Bing that it will be impossible to do it from outside, and they will have to send the disciples of their department to tidy up inside, and at that, it seemed that there were still people who wouldn't give up, and at that, there were some people wearing red, and the boy shouts to all those in red, who are disciples of the training department, to follow him, and he asks everyone to be quick because it was an emergency, and at that moment, that dark clone of Bai enters too, thinking that he should be quick because it was an emergency, and then, inside the kingdom, Liu was battling with a girl who had short hair, and at that, the girl calls Liu a child and says that she has talent, but it's sad that she won't live long enough to show all the potential she has, and at that moment, moment, the girl simply smashes the insect on the ground, while there was a man with his face completely bandaged next to her and with a red frog in his hand. At this, Liu asks if the short-haired woman isn't afraid that she'll report her to the sect, and at this, the woman asks what Liu means by report and asks who Liu is going to report to and if she's going to report to the Hall of Justice, and the man with the completely bandaged face tells Liu to shut up and she should die soon because nobody told her master to say the wrong thing. That man is Lucius from the Hall of Justice of the Golden Core Realm, and the woman is called He Shiling from the Hall of Justice and is in the Silent Spirit Realm, and at that moment, Liu simply invokes a great power with her energy, and she says that she refuses to believe that they from the Hall of Justice can do whatever they want in there, and at that, he calls Liu a child and tells her not to say that she really thinks she'll get out of that place alive. And quickly, Lucio simply throws his sword at the attack that Liu had launched at them, and at that, the girl is completely stunned at that moment, thinking and wondering how it happened. She wonders if his sword ended up cutting her lightning in half, and at that moment, He Shiling and Lucio start running towards the girl, saying that it's time to end this, and when they start getting closer, she thinks that the two of them are stronger than her, and if she fights, she will postpone the inevitable, but also, she feels that she couldn't escape, and at that moment, she calls My Mang a pet and asks for her help, saying that she can't go without cultivation again, and My Mang replies to Liu, saying that she pointed out the treasure to her, and not only did she not find it, but she still managed to get into trouble, and while she was talking to My Mang, He Shiling prepares to attack young Liu, but just as she was about to strike, a strong energy appears, leaving Lucio worried, shouting his companion's name, and then, seeing that gusts start to approach him, he tries to cut that ice in half, but even so, he was hit by the blow. That blow had come out of My Mang's mouth, who at that moment was in her full version, and she is extremely taller than Liu. She says that the two of them are not her opponents, and if they want to get out of this alive, then they should get out of there. And then Lucio on the ground, seeing his companion frozen, wonders if that little animal has turned into a human and says that she is a spirit empress, and then My Mang tells him that the girl is under her protection, and if he wanted to stay alive, he should leave immediately, and Lucio, without wasting any time, simply starts running. He was afraid that he might lose his life to that spirit empress, and then Liu asks why My Mang is so big, and My Mang says that it was only to intimidate those two scumbags who were messing with her, and also, she didn't want to show her true form to them, and then, after My Mang has said all that, Liu asks her if it's really okay to let them go, and quickly, My Mang reverts to her moth form and answers Liu, saying that she, as an empress, is not someone who can be asked for favors, and she's only protecting Liu because the master told her to, and then she points with her moth's paw, telling Liu that the treasure is over there anyway, and then she motions for the girl to go where she's saying, and the girl just confirms and starts walking. Then the scene changes completely. A few days ago, Liu asks what the hell My Mang is doing, and then My Mang is hugging her and telling her that she's helping her to cultivate, calling her silly. At this, Liu asks My Mang who would cultivate in this way, and at that moment, the girl lies down. My Mang explains that she is helping her to heal the wounds she has. The medicine she has been given only helps the wounds not to worsen in the state of the body. It cannot improve the wounds 100%, and at this, My Mang concentrates her energy on Liu's belly, and the girl asks her to take it easy, and My Mang asks Liu not to worry, because she's using her Kai to treat her, and it's just that maybe the Kai will stimulate her a little. Then the scene changes to the present. Somewhere in the forest of the demon race, Lucio was using his Kai to be able to thaw out his companion, whom My Mang had frozen a little while ago, and during this, he kept looking at Shiling and saying that she'd better be okay, asking how he could live if she died, until he hears a noise and quickly turns in the direction the sound was coming from. He wonders if there is bloodlust, and at that, the shadowy Ba Luin clone behind the bush calls out to Lucio, and he's shilling and says that they are both disciples of the law enforcement hall who have deliberately murdered their fellow disciples, and this is a crime that cannot go unpunished, and goes on to say that next time, before they call out to kill people, they should remember to be prepared to be killed. When Lucio saw that clone, his only visible eye went wide open, and he said that it was he who was talking, and the all-seeing eye was there, gigantic, and at the same time, Bai's clone thought that since they had let the law enforcement agency use such means, he shouldn't be blamed for being ruthless, and then he began to concentrate the energy he had in his two fingertips and began to speak the seals, preparing an attack, and he thinks that this will be the last warning he will will give, and he doesn't want them to force him to do something like that. Then the scene changes completely. The old man was bleeding profusely in the secluded cave, and there were two men worried about him, calling for their supreme leader, and the supreme leader answers, saying that he is fine, and at that, he asks to what frightening degree Bai's strength has recovered. The narrative then shifts to the dark and mysterious interior of the Cave of Demonic Ruins, a place shrouded in an aura of danger and mystery. Mai Meng, in her original and imposing form, flew over the dark and tortuous corridors with her graceful movements, as if she were exploring the place with disdain, her curious gaze roaming the surroundings as she spoke, almost absent-mindedly, to the young Su Liu. She commented that she had a strange feeling of déjà vu, believing that they had both been there at some point, the uncertainty evident in her voice as she turned to Liu, asking with an almost accusatory tone if Bai's disciple even knew where they were going. Liu, keeping calm despite the growing pressure, began to walk along the rocky and uneven path in front of them, her steps resolute, but her expression reflecting the concentration needed to navigate that labyrinth of dangers. Meanwhile, Mai Meng, who was floating next to her, wouldn't stop complaining. Her incessant whispering seemed to echo off the walls of the cave, while she continuously grumbled about her frustration with the situation, said that she was tired of flying for so long, and that it would be much better if they sorted out what they had to do soon so that they could rest as soon as possible. Mai Meng's comment, however, were beginning to exhaust Liu's patience. Bai's young disciple tried hard to ignore the criticism, but it was impossible not to be affected by Mai Meng's irritable tone. She accused her of being incapable, claiming that Liu didn't know how to do anything other than fight, and even that, according to Mai Meng, was questionable. Her words were sharp, full of irony and sarcasm, like when she asked if Liu still believed she had any chance of achieving first place in the exam by acting like that. Every word seemed to weigh like a stone on the young disciple's shoulder. However, there was a moment when Liu simply couldn't take it anymore. The built-up tension exploded, and she raised her voice against Mai Meng. With a firm and angry tone, she said that if it hadn't been for Mai Meng's own insistence on finding that supposed treasure, they probably wouldn't have been lost in that labyrinth. His frustration showed in every word as he accused Mai Meng of being extremely annoying, a companion who only knew how to grumble and get in the way. Then something unexpected happened. Mai Meng stopped complaining, and his expression changed dramatically. His eyes began to shine with an icy, supernatural glow, and a kind of ice crystal formed in his pupils, the air around them suddenly becoming colder, almost suffocating. Liu, now on alert, watched as Mai Meng prepared an ice attack with frightening speed. With a mixture of shock and disbelief, Liu asked what Mai Meng was doing and if she really wanted to fight there. At that moment, before she could get an answer, Mai Meng launched a powerful ice attack. The ice beam grazed Liu, who was paralyzed for an instant, trying to understand what was happening. Stunned, she wondered if Mai Meng had really intended to attack her, but when she turned to look at what had happened, she realized the truth. Mai Meng wasn't attacking her, but protecting her. His ice attack had frozen a horde of poisonous worms that were stealthily approaching, ready to attack her. Liu, still visibly shaken, looked at the frozen worms and asked with a trembling voice if those were really poisonous worms. Mai Meng, with a serious and somewhat irritated tone, replied that Liu shouldn't underestimate them. She explained that, although they might seem insignificant, if these poisonous worms gathered in large numbers, even a demon king could face serious difficulties in dealing with them. Mai Meng, taking advantage of the situation, even scolded Liu, saying that she should be grateful for her presence there, because, without her help, it was likely that Liu wouldn't have survived that encounter. While listening to Mai Meng's words, Liu immersed herself in her thoughts, reflecting on what had just happened. She began to consider the implications of the presence of those poisonous worms. She knew that these creatures only inhabited dark environments rich in spiritual chi, which could be an indication of something greater. This idea lit a spark in her mind, and she concluded that the presence of the worms could mean that there was something valuable or powerful hidden there. With renewed determination, Liu said that, if that was the case, they couldn't waste the opportunity. Taking the initiative, Liu began to prepare an attack with the back of her hand, her movements precise, guided by intuition and the hope of finding what they were looking for. She concentrated, feeling the energy flow through her body as she thought that, if there was something hidden there, she was determined to find it. And then she throws the attack, hitting those creatures with everything while they were frozen, and suddenly Mai Meng is quite surprised, saying that Liu just had an extraordinary encounter, and she says that it seems her revelation is very close, and at the same time, Liu thinks and wonders why that place place seems so familiar, and then Liu also asks what Mai Meng thinks of them going back first, because she has a bad feeling about it. And Mai Meng replies to Bai's disciple that with a spirit empress there, she wonders why Liu is afraid, and also says that since they've found that place, she wonders why they don't go in and have a look. Mai Meng has probably never heard the expression curiosity killed the cat, so she casts a skill at that entrance so that it can be opened called the cold cut of the sky, which quickly causes a huge explosion, and then she turns to Liu and asks her what she thinks of it and says that with her there to protect her, Liu will have all the fun she wants, and at that moment the girl points ahead, telling Mai Meng to look more carefully before saying anything, and then the Empress turns around and is shocked. The wall was in perfect condition, and she wonders how this could be possible. After all, she launched a beautiful attack to destroy that wall, and then she prepares an attack on each arm she has, with all 4 arms with a little energy at home. She tells Liu that she was only joking at that moment and asks Liu to see that, because that is the true strength of an empress, and then she throws her skills at the door, shouting for it to open, and then, amidst the dust, she asks if it worked and also asks if it should have worked now. However, the door was literally unscathed and also seemed to be cleaner than ever, and at this, Mai Meng became completely frustrated, wondering if she really hadn't caused any kind of scratch, and then she simply picked up an ice pack and threw it on the ground, expressing the great anger she was feeling at that moment, and then she approached the door and asked what the point was of making an abandoned ruin with such resistant poisonous worms, and she says that there must be something wrong with the person who made that door, and at that moment, Liu sees a tomb, and she sees some handprints, and then she puts her hand on that handprint, using her Kai, and suddenly, the door opens, leaving Mai Meng not understanding, asking why that door opened at that moment. She didn't understand that Liu had managed to open that door, and at that moment, Liu was perplexed. She thinks that there was no chance of that happening, and at the same time wonders how that could be possible. The tomb simply rises up with a completely purple aura, and then Mai Meng starts singing a song she made up at that moment, saying that once upon a time there was a little empress whose name was Mai Meng, and then she closes in on the door and says that that place is said to have an inheritance left by an expert, and then Liu thinks that the place looks really familiar, and then Mai Meng approaches an unidentified object and says that it should be the key to obtaining the inheritance, and she starts laughing, saying that it's the Kai/circle or the hawk's breathing technique, and she's really looking forward to it. And at that moment, Liu becomes a little apprehensive, thinking that now she remembers and recalling her past memories. She thinks that that demonic aura, that's the sealed place she set up in her previous life when she was still in the Mahayana stage, and at that moment, when Mai Meng passes the sword over it, Liu screams, telling her to wait, and says that she couldn't touch it. And then Mai Meng asks Liu what she was talking about, when suddenly, everything starts to fall apart, and a large part of the place is half filled with purple energy, and the boy is completely freaked out. He asks what the hell is going on there, and then the scene changes to a super weird guy with energy in his hands, telling the elder who was reporting that there is a sudden anomaly in the secret realm and all the teleportation matrices aren't working. At this, the open-mouthed elder comments that he is afraid that a demon emperor in the stage of bodily unity has appeared, and questions begin to arise, such as whether the kingdom is not secret and also why an imperial demon would appear. And at this, some people become worried, with one boy saying that his partner is still inside and asking what he should do at that moment. And another boy said that he had heard that the director rushed to the site with the elders, and then they came to the conclusion that they were doomed, and then the elder shouted, asking everyone who was there to remain calm and not to panic. And then an old man who was on a video call asked Deacon Hall what was happening inside the ruins. That old man was Director Lai. At this, Elder Bing was shocked. He had just heard from the Sri Lankan Mexican. I told about a demon emperor and asked how this was possible, and the toad replied, saying yes, and there are many disciples who can't escape the ruins and teleportation isn't available. And at that moment, after hearing the toad say this, the elder shouted, ordering the teleporters to go inside. He tells them that they must save all the disciples inside, and then the girls that the protagonist had saved before are at a loss, seeing a portal opening, and they don't understand, wondering if this is something that has to do with their master, Moon, and then Yunxi asks what those things are, and then they decide to go through the portal and find their master, Moon, and then they're shaking a lot. Yuo Ruo hugs her master, stuttering and saying that she's inside, and then she's interrupted by Moon, telling them not to be scared anymore, because because their master is there, and they should calm down and take a deep breath. And suddenly, the protagonist appears, asking Yungsi and Yunruo if they have seen his disciple. Liu and Yungsi reply that they haven't seen the girl, and then Moon sees the disciples meeting their masters after passing through the portal and crying a lot. They are happy to see their master, and they are happy to get out alive. She comments that the disciples transported out appeared next to their instructors, which means that Su Liu might be in trouble. And at that moment, the scene changed to where Su Liu was. A creature was laughing and telling the mortal world to tremble at his presence because he had returned. That was the demon emperor Dongzhu, and he was shouting, saying that this world belonged to him, at which point Mai Meng thought and at the same time wondered what she should do, and also wondered why a demon emperor was sealed in a place like that, and she thought that perhaps she should leave the girl there and run, but then that demon would kill her. And then she asks if everything is all right, and the demon emperor asks why there's an insect there, and then he points his finger and comments that it's bad luck, shooting towards Mai Meng, and she asks if that would happen again, and then she quickly creates an ice barrier to defend herself, and then Liu tells Mai Meng that she would help her, and Mai Meng replies that doing nothing would be the best help at that moment, as things were critical. And unexpectedly and abruptly, the demon emperor, who until that moment had been attacking relentlessly, ceases his movements for a brief moment, creating an almost unbearable tension in the air around him. He fixes his intense and penetrating gaze on Mai Meng, watching her with curiosity and a certain incredulity, before finally speaking, his voice vibrating like thunder through space, as he states that Mai Meng is of the same race as him, which seems to intrigue him a little. Then, with a defiant and authoritative tone, he questions what she is doing there and whether she really dares to defy him, as if her mere presence at that moment was an affront to his position as absolute sovereign. Mai Meng, keeping her composure despite the overwhelming pressure, responds to the demon emperor with a mixture of sarcasm and cunning. She declares, almost contemptuously, that Liu is nothing more than a bald monkey, an insignificant human being and slave created by demons. Her words are laden with intent, as if trying to minimize the girl's importance in the face of demonic majesty. And then, as if to ease the situation, Mai Meng does something surprising. She appeals to the demon emperor, calling him majesty and asking him to help them. Even though her words were just an attempt to buy time, in her head, she thinks of the absolute power of a demon emperor, whose strength is such that the mere snap of his fingers was enough to force her to use all the energy she had to survive. Meanwhile, Liu, trying to remain calm in the face of the palpable terror of the situation, approaches Mai Meng and whispers, her voice trembling with worry, asking what they can do to get out of this confrontation alive. Mai Meng, for her part, is quick to respond. With a determined look, she tells Bai's disciple that her only option is to flee as quickly as possible. Mai Meng explains that she has her own methods of dealing with the situation and, with one swift movement, pushes Liu in the opposite direction, ordering her to leave immediately, shouting, almost desperately, that Liu must not remain there so as not to stain the ground that belongs to the demonic majesty with her presence. At the same time, Mai Meng thinks about how she will need to buy enough time for her little copy, Mini Mai Meng, to be able to take Liu away from there. The demon emperor, watching the scene with an air of almost cruel superiority, just analyzes their movements. He then declares, with unshakable confidence, that there is no reason for Mai Meng to worry, because no one will run away from that place. His words carry a crushing weight, making it clear that he is in absolute control of the situation. Mai Meng, however, does not let her concern show. With a provocative tone and still calling him majesty, she retorts, saying that it is not polite to listen to a girl's private conversation, trying to divert his attention for a few more seconds. Without hesitation, the demon emperor launches a new attack towards Mai Meng, a blast of destructive energy that travels through space with frightening speed. As he carries out the attack, he declares with contempt that both Mai Meng and Liu are mere insects to him, insignificant beings whose lives he can take with extreme ease at any moment he wishes, his speech laden with arrogance and absolute certainty of his supremacy. At that moment, Mai Meng remembers something crucial, the protagonist's words echoing in her mind. He had told her, at an earlier moment, that the seal he carried with him was incredibly powerful and could only be activated by means of her blood essence. However, he had also warned that that seal should only be used in situations of extreme need, when there were no other alternatives. The memory brings with it an internal conflict, but Mai Meng finally makes a decision, facing the demon emperor. She responds defiantly, saying that he should explain his strength to that monster. While activating the seal that Bai had entrusted to her, suddenly, something completely unexpected happens. A young boy, who was in the midst of chaos, is hit by an overwhelming force and, in a shocking way, begins to transform into something grotesque. His human figure crumbles, giving way to an extremely bizarre and terrifying creature, whose appearance defies any conventional description. The surrounding energy seems to change, becoming even darker and denser. At that moment, the portal that had been prepared by the elders opens, allowing the task elder and his team to enter the area to rescue those still in place. However, the scene they encounter is completely unexpected. The old man, observing the grotesque creature, is perplexed without immediately understanding what was happening. His eyes are fixed on the creature that, without warning, begins to run towards him with impressive speed. The old man, reacting quickly, draws his sword and, with a powerful voice, shouts at the creature. He calls it an inferior being and orders it to die, while performing a single devastating blow with his blade. The impact is so precise and overwhelming that the creature is broken in half, falling to pieces on the ground in a spectacle of brutality and strength. And suddenly, more bodies began to appear that ended up becoming zombies, and then, the elder comments that it will never end, and then, his eyes change color, and he uses a technique called Spirit Sword Formation, and then, launches an attack called the 10-bladed iridescent curtain, and then, the elder asks them to take the instructors to look for their disciples, and the elders, like him, will protect the portals, and he says that those of Master Mu can only teleport people there. When he finds the disciples, they should come back immediately, and Zhang should remember that he shouldn't fight with the demon emperor in this. Zhang says yes. However, he would suggest that he sends instructor Bai back to the academy, and in this, Bai asks Zhang why he should send him back to the academy. At this, the very angry Zhang points his finger at the protagonist and says that he's only at the stage of the revolt of light, and if he enters, he'll die like a little ant, and what's more, he'll have to bring his body back, and he still hasn't settled the score with Bai. And at this, the protagonist says that he's like this, only with Zhang, and at this, the elder comments to Bai that he's sacrificed a lot for the academy, and this time, he should stay back. At this, Moon talks to Elder Lai, who is also an instructor, and asks him how he would be comfortable, knowing that his disciple is in danger, and what's more, his only disciple is there, and the elder should let him go. At which point Elder Lai replies to Moon that he understands what she means and agrees with her, at which point he tells both instructors, Moon and Bai, that they should avoid dying as much as possible, and asks them if they understand this. At this, Bai says that yes, he will do his best, and Moon thinks that she will use this opportunity to see how strong the protagonist is, and at this, a very angry Zhang comments that Bai is an ingrate and he will die and no one will bring his body back, and at this, the protagonist replies to Zhang, saying that he should relax about it, and if that happens, 500 women will come to take his body. At this, Zhang says that Bai Liuchen is very stupid, and then the scene changes to a goo that was on the ground, and suddenly it starts to form, and at this, the creature wonders who dares to create a trap for him, and just like that, in the sky, Bai's clone says that the seal has been broken and is being resisted, and then it would start the annihilation, and at that moment, it starts to form a ball of energy, and then, he throws all that energy at the creature, and then the scene changes and Mai Mang's body is in the ruins, completely frozen and without her arms, and suddenly, a little cocoon comes out of her mouth, falling all the way to the ground, and then, suddenly, the cocoon breaks and she comes out of that cocoon, and then, her wings come out of her back, and then, she comments to herself that that monster is crazy to put the seal there, and she's lucky she had that little cocoon to protect herself. At this, the mini Mai Mang approaches, pointing her finger to indicate something to Mai Mang, and at this, she begins to follow the mini Mai Mang, and when she arrives, she finds Liu lying on the ground, and she has a flower growing in her right eye, and witnessing this, Mai Mang thinks that she should ignore it. If the leader's shadow is defeated, the demon emperor will come for her at the same time, and she also thinks that that girl has been contaminated with the smell of the demon, and if she has brought it with her, she will die. And she also thinks that with the seals broken, the monster won't find her for a while, and it doesn't matter. She was captured to be a pet, and there's no reason for her to stay, because not only is her food restricted, and at that, she remembers Liu asking if she had eaten Xiao Wu's carrot again, and her answering no. She thinks the place she lives is horrible. As Liu lies on her bed, she asks what the girl is doing, and Liu replies to Mai Meng, saying that she's making a new blanket for her, so she can stop stealing hers, and as she does so, she looks for more reasons to complain, until she remembers Liu thanking her for helping her pass her internship, and she hands Mai Meng a cake she made just for her. And as Mai Meng asks Bai's disciple if she's treating her like an insect, and then she carries the girl and starts flying, mumbling that she's a lot of trouble and she's going to take Liu and the girl better not die, because if she does, she wonders who would do the dishes and cook. And then the scene changes to the demon emperor who was flying, until suddenly a bolt of lightning hits him hard, making him fall and go straight to the ground. At this, the demon emperor says that strength of the caliber of Bai's clone shouldn't appear in that world, and then the demon emperor asks who he is, and at this, Bai's clone doesn't answer anything and just starts preparing a blow to throw at the demon emperor. And at this, the creature comments that he's still quiet and asks if he doesn't think he's worthy of knowing his name. And then he launches an attack towards the protagonist's shadow clone, and at that, Zhang pretends to be a bush, holding some sticks and putting a bit of bush on his head. He asks what kind of shadow that is and says that it can deal with the demon emperor in a way as if it were something completely simple. And at that, Bai comments that he seems to be at the tribulation passage stage and tells Zhang that he could certainly do it too. And Zhang says that he can't and says that they should forget about the missing disciples and retreat, and calls the protagonist a bastard and also asks why he's holding a talisman. And then the protagonist puts the talisman to Zhang's head and asks why they're retreating and tells him to sit in a corner, and then he starts stretching, saying that now it's time for him to deal with that weird bird. And at that moment, Zhang, with the talisman on his face, didn't understand anything. As if he were a child, the protagonist tied him to a tree, and he stayed there, drooling, as if he were only a few months old. And at that, the demon emperor thought that his power was almost exhausted, and he still hadn't managed to hurt that shadow, and he wondered if he would have to die again. And he also wondered if the demon of the earth was around. And then he begins to laugh, saying that with the help of the demon lord of the land, all of them, mere insects, will be crushed. And at that, the shadow comments that time has run out and he is returning to his original body. And at that, the demon emperor doesn't understand and asks if the shadow wanted to escape, and then launches an attack on the shadow, telling it to die in the most chaotic way possible. And at that moment, Bai of the Order, quickly making that shadow disappear. At this, Mai Meng looks up at the sky and wonders if that's the aura of a monster, and suddenly, the protagonist's energy simply goes towards the demon emperor and cuts into his ability. And at this, the demon emperor thinks, and at the same time wonders if it's another strong opponent. And at this, the demon emperor asks who Bai is, who had approached him. And at this, the protagonist asks if he had said anything about the earth demon being there just now. And he also asks if the demon emperor had fought his other for so long and still didn't recognize him. And then, quickly, Bai throws a talisman at the demon emperor. And at this, the demon emperor is perplexed, asking if this is an immortal binding talisman, and says that it can't be, and also asks, referring to Bai as a mere bald monkey who is at the stage of the rotating light, how he could have an immortal binding talisman and a clone at the stage of the tribulation passage. And then the protagonist asks what it matters if he's in the rotating light stage. He says that it's not because the demon emperor hasn't seen it that means it's impossible. And then the demon emperor, hearing him say that, asks who exactly he is, and Bai replies that the demon emperor doesn't need to know who he is, and he tells the demon emperor to tell him how he knew about the West demon, making him feel pain. At this, the demon emperor becomes a little incredulous, shouting and asking what kind of monster Bai is and how he's able to burn his soul, and he starts shouting a little desperately, saying that he doesn't really know anything and asks him to stop burning him. And at that moment, Mai Meng thinks that the shout she's hearing is Dongzu's, and she wonders if that monster would punish her if he saw the girl like that. And then the scene changes again to the demon emperor and the protagonist. The demon emperor said that he really didn't know, and the protagonist replied that he was in no hurry and could take as long as he needed to think about it. And then Mai Meng arrived, calling the boy brother Luochen and saying that this was bad because Miss Su was about to die. And then he was taken by surprise and asked Mai Meng how Liu had gotten that way. And with a bit of fear, she answers the boy, saying that she apologizes to him and says that it's all her fault and she couldn't protect Liu as she really should, and she gets very sad saying that. And then the protagonist says that Liu's condition now was caused by the damn demon emperor, and he says that everything is fine now. He didn't want to know any more about how the demon emperor is connected to the demon race. And at that, the demon emperor says that the protagonist can't kill him. If he does, the demon lord of the land won't let him get away until he sees something that leaves him incredulous, saying that it's the portal to the underworld, and Bai tells the Demon Emperor that even if the Supreme Demon came today, he would still die, and suddenly the portal begins to pull on the Demon Emperor, and he refuses several times, saying that he's a Demon Emperor and he couldn't die like that, and he screams, asking the Demon Lord of the land to save him, and the portal door slams shut. And then Mai Meng, having witnessed everything, comments that as is expected of Bai, not even a Demon Emperor can do anything in his presence, and suddenly Liu starts screaming, and then she quickly gets up from Bai's arms and goes to attack him, and then Mai Meng shouts that that is the old monster, and then the girl prepares to bite the protagonist, and the master tells his disciple that she should die hard and not let go. And then she bites her master on the neck with all her might, and out of nowhere, she returns to normal with that flower that was in her eye, creating out of nowhere. She looks at Bai and recognizes her master, and then he says good morning to her and asks his disciple if she slept well, and then she gets a little flushed and apologizes to her master, saying that she just crossed the line, and he replies that she shouldn't worry because it's not her fault. At that, she asks the master if he has also been infected by the Demon Emperor, and the protagonist replies that she shouldn't worry about that either, as it's just a small remnant of the Demon Emperor and won't be a threat to him. And at that moment, he makes his energy exhale and then removes the remnant, and then the system panel shows him that it has been detected that the user is experiencing an external invasion, and the antivirus mode has been activated, and suddenly it starts to give an error, showing that it wasn't as simple as the protagonist imagined. At this, the Demon Emperor comments that he didn't know that he would be foolish enough to sacrifice himself to save his disciple's life, and as long as there is a bit of him in this world, he can live forever, and after taking over the protagonist's body, he will destroy them all, calling them all mere insects. And at this, he looks at those panels appearing with error messages, and he wonders what was going on there. The system panel said that there had been an error and an unknown invasion had been detected, and so the annihilation was beginning, and the Demon Emperor said to himself that he didn't believe that the boy had any kind of defense against this. And then, at night on Kingluan Peak, the girl was looking at her hand, which was quite blurry from her perspective, and she thought that her vision had gotten worse, and she needed to move quickly. And then she remembers Mai Meng and her master. She thinks maybe she's become a burden to them, and she thinks she has to get stronger at any cost. And then, while the girl was reflecting, Mai Meng arrived. She sighs. She's just got out of the shower, and she comments that they've worked hard that day and asks the girl if her eye is still uncomfortable, and then Liu tries to make fun of the situation, telling Mai Meng to look, because now she's a cyclops. And then Mai Meng, seeing her playing with it, punches her in the head, saying that she shouldn't play with it, and Liu apologizes to her for it. And then they lie down on the bed, and Mai Meng comments that this time, it was her who made her like that, and then she apologizes to Liu and also says that next time, she'll protect her properly and she won't let anything happen to her. And then Liu asks Mai Meng not to come over there because it's too tight.